Glad that you're here, and it really takes all of us to ensure that we have an informed workforce system. So thank you to the faculty that are on the call, the speakers that are going to be here, as well as the industry and employer representatives and other workforce stakeholders. We really appreciate your time this morning. I want to introduce Orion Walker, who's the Regional Director of Employer Engagement for the ECU sector in the Greater Sacramento region, who is my co-host this morning. So I'll let Orion welcome you this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Renee. Great to see a lot of familiar faces joining in on the meeting here. Good to see you all virtually. And it's been a lot of, it's been great working with Renee and Jesse and Valley Vision and everybody else on our team putting this together. I think we have a really good lineup, and this is going to be a solid, packed morning of information and conversation. So buckle in. And if you don't know me, my name's, like it says there, Orion Walker. I work for the community college system in the Far North region. We have 15 community colleges in the Far North region. And as the employer engagement piece, I work with industry connecting with the colleges, and that's what we're doing today. And hopefully following up after today, we will use this conversation to further that conversation. So with that, thanks for joining. Thank you everybody for being here, and let's dive in.
Perfect. Thanks, Orion. These advisories are provided through strong workforce funding through the Los Rios Community College District in partnership with the Far North Consortia of Community Colleges. And it's supported by a wider stakeholder coalition who's represented on this slide. We want to thank everyone for their participation in this, including the workforce boards, community college system, K through 12 representatives, and the overall strong workforce system. Our next slide shows the agenda of what we're going to go through today. So we're doing the welcome and introduction. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Robert Eyler on industry insights, economic policy, and COVID-19 implications. After that, we'll be hearing from the Center of Excellence at Los Rios about the labor market trends and occupations. We will have an employer panel discussion. There will be a break at 10:10 for 10 minutes. So we will trust you to take a break and stretch yourself. It's 3 hours, and that's a long time. And then have you come back to hear about some policy market drivers by Gregg D. And then we will have sprinkled throughout some workforce engagement videos that we are hoping will work by technology-wise to show you the great work that the community college system is doing. And we will have an industry insight panel discussion. We have some fantastic industry and employer panelists to share their insights and information about how the industry is changing with you. And then we will conclude together. We hope you'll stick with us through the whole event. There's a lot of great information, and we will encourage as much interaction as possible. So anytime you have questions or comments, you can put those in the chat. Like Jesse had said, any networking can also occur there. And after each presentation, there will be a time for questions and answers. Next slide, Jesse. And so at this point, I will introduce to you Dr. Robert Eyler, who's President of Economic Forensics and Analytics. And he's going to be presenting the industry insights, economic policy, and COVID-19 information for us. I'll hand it over to Dr. Eyler now.
Thanks, Renee. I'm going to now see if I can share my screen. Just let me know when it's up there. It should be up now. Can you see it?
Yep.
And can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Here we go. So folks, as Renee suggested, I'm going to talk to you about some things that are going on with the economy and link them back up to the ECU industries and ultimately provide at least hopefully some vision forward as to where things may be going in the greater Sacramento and the Far North areas. Some of the things economists are watching is what's going to happen with the Biden administration's plans for more fiscal stimulus. We seem in the news every day to creep forward one more step to getting another relatively large round of fiscal stimulus. We've already had 2 rounds since April 2020, and a lot of economists are starting to shift their concern from what we're going to get with respect to help for households and businesses to whether or not we should make transfer payments, meaning we cut a $1,400 check to a household, or do we make investment? And I'll come back and talk about that later in terms of some of the vision that may be there going forward for ECU Industries, because some of that investment may very well positively affect industries and jobs in these areas. The second is how well the vaccines are distributed and used, and ultimately how we generate fewer cases of COVID-19, which will help restore business and consumer confidence across the board. And a lot of the forecasts I'm going to allude to in the next few minutes are predicated upon the idea that the vaccines work the way they're supposed to work scientifically and ultimately socially. But we know that the pandemic and the economic effects have hit our lower income households hardest. So one of the things is that we've seen a lot of challenges in terms of, again, another round of fiscal stimulus that might focus itself on relatively low income households. But we also have some opportunities in terms of workforce training and how we might see career transition potentially into ECU industries and jobs with a latent workforce that will not find its old job coming back. And I'll allude to more of that at the end too. I'm going to walk you quickly through a bunch of labor data at both the national and state level to really provide you a context of not only where we've been, but hopefully where we're going, because the forecasts are actually relatively good. But here's kind of where we've been. This is looking at the American economy by industry and watching the evolution of jobs from the beginning of the pandemic to the end of January. We're not going to get new labor data, unfortunately, for California until the middle of March, because there's been some issues at EDD with respect to tracking jobs and actually getting through the backlog of unemployment insurance claims, which we heard just got dealt with in the last couple of days. But you'll watch an evolution that's a little bit hard in the beginning and then gets better, and it really showcases the initial momentum and then some of the slowdown that we've seen over the last couple of months. This is April 2020, looking back 1 year. And what these are the percentage changes in the jobs by industry going back 1 12-month period. So you can see on the far right-hand side, bars and restaurants, which are food services and drinking places and sort of the fancy labor market terms, and accommodation, which is hotels and motels, really sunk to somewhere about a third of the jobs that were there 1 year previous were gone by April, because there was this huge cut in jobs. But then labor market momentum turned, and we saw through the summer and the fall, things get better. Here's November. You can see a real change, except for on the far end, because the travel industry was really hurt the hardest. December, we gave a little bit back. In January, we gave a little bit back. So you can see here on this graph, the nature of the initial recovery over the first 6 or 7 months of the recession, but the last few months have been a little bit tough. Now, if you look 4 slots from the left to the right, you can see construction there, and that's where most of the jobs, indirectly or directly, that ECU is concerned about are in. And initially, for a lot of places in California, we saw construction and its arrays declared essential jobs, which was good. It kept a lot of projects on the move, but that was not true everywhere in California. And that's why you can see in the US, and this is also true, we saw a little bit of a cut there initially. Thinking about recovery at a more general level and trying to aggregate a little bit, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to compare the Great Recession to the current recession. So one of the things I get asked a lot as an economist is, how does this compare to previous recessions? And a lot of people, because they watch the news on TV, want to jump to the recession right after the First World War, because there was also a major pandemic at that time. Not very comparable. Want to jump to the Great Depression because the magnitude of the job cuts were so large. Also not very comparable. Best comparison, for better or for worse, is the Great Recession, the last recession we went through. Well, here's the evolution of jobs from the beginning of the Great Recession to its quote unquote end, meaning that we recovered all the jobs that we lost in terms of the total volume. Now, inside of that, there's some sectoral shifts, and construction was one of those sectors that really suffered in the last recession, which is not necessarily true this time, as you saw on that graph previously. But here's where we are now, or where we are at the end of January. So you can see sort of the theme I suggested from that previous graph, where we saw a big cut initially, and then we were creeping up over the first 6-7 months after the recession really took hold hard. But then we curled over a little bit, and we need that black line to get back up to that red line. Why that's important for these industries is because if it does not, and this recession lingers a little bit longer, business and consumer confidence flattening means less investment, less expansion of house, business, multiple ways of looking at construction. And then you're really relying on heavy construction coming out of the government or some other governmental push, because the private sector may not have enough confidence to move forward at the right speed. So it's something to watch if that number continues to curl or stay flat or pick back up toward the red. And there's a lot of debate about what direction it's going to go. The forecasts actually look pretty good, though. So while the last few months have been a little tough, what I'm going to show you briefly is the Philadelphia Federal Reserve does a quarterly survey of forecasters. And this is their current forecast. looking over the next few quarters, this is growth of income after inflation in the United States. And the first column that's not shaded is the percentage change in income after inflation last quarter's forecast. So you can see almost every single one of those numbers looking forward over 2021 has increased the growth rate from the previous quarter, which is good. The previous quarter's forecast had a lag of the second round of fiscal stimulus, did not expect it to come, so it was a little bit lower. Now that it's shown up and there's talk about a third, these forecasts have picked up. Well, that should also pick up labor market activity. The second set of data on these forecasts are the unemployment rate looking forward the next few quarters. Again, better than the previous quarter's forecast. And actually, labor markets generally have beat most economists' forecasts since the beginning of this recession. If we look forward the next few years, the growth rate has picked up in the forecast here as well. And a lot of that is dependent upon, as I started with, two major items. One, fiscal stimulus comes again and gives us another fiscal policy boost, which we've seen already twice in 2020. But then also there's efficacy with respect to the vaccines, and we creep toward what one might characterize as normal. We will see how normal it is, and I'll allude to this later as well. The labor market over the next few years, the reason I'm showing you this is because economists generally, as a consensus, believe we're not going to be back to the original conditions we were at the beginning of 2020 until probably 2023 at the earliest. So something to think about in terms of planning, thinking about the evolution of ECU industries and jobs. 2023 is a good conservative bet in which the economy will basically have itself righted in such a way that a lot of the ills we're currently dealing with should be somewhat mitigated by 2023. But folks, think about that. That's 2 years from now, and really almost 3, because we're thinking the end of 2023, not the beginning. So somewhere, an economist a little bit squishy here, because after about 18 months, we all get very foggy in terms of our vision looking forward. If you think about 2023 when you're planning, if you get lucky and it's 2022, great. 2024 is also out there for a lot of economists. So be careful when you're planning. Think 2023. Okay, well, now let's look at the region in California and try to see some contrasts with respect to some trends. And then we'll deep dive into the sort of larger data that exists around these industries, because Ebony's going to give you an amazing deep dive after me in terms of the occupations. These are the latest data. Now, unfortunately, because of that delay in the labor data, we don't have the January data yet. We won't get it until about 3 weeks from now. But this is basically the state of the affairs at the end of 2020. So California ended the year around 9% unemployment. Butte County, Shasta County doing a little bit better. Yuba and Sutter counties doing a little bit worse, and Sacramento doing best of this group. And Sacramento has actually seen a really nice comeback in terms of the metropolitan area with respect to having Placer, El Dorado, and Yolo counties involved in the data. And unfortunately, the way the data are reported, we can't really strip Sacramento County out properly by itself, but it very much is the engine of those 4 counties as a whole. So another piece of data, though, I want you to look at is that top row. The change in the labor force is something economists watch very closely, because when recession hits, a couple things start to happen. One, we see people choose to retire, and that shifts the amount of people who are out there in terms of the workforce. The second is people move. So one of the things about that labor force change is, while you may see job growth, you may also have people that are leaving for other places, and you may lose local labor force because of migration. Now, there's actually a third element, though, in this round, which is a little tricky and something to think about. We've actually seen people elect to walk away from the labor force because of childcare and an inability of their kids to go to school physically. And we're waiting to see if schools open, which then would reduce that across the board. And why that's so important is because if you look at Yuba and Sutter counties together, it's almost 10% down in terms of the labor force that was there 1 year before that. So those percentage changes and those negative numbers look back 1 year. And that 10% loss in labor force is a little bit intriguing because it's relatively large, even though we are still considered to be in recession. I'm going to show you a bunch of data now that are very similar to that graph we looked at comparing to the Great Recession, to try to show you regional recovery and the momentum. You're going to see a lot of similar graphs, and I'll wrap up with these graphs talking about why they look so similar. Here's California. So California had this movement after the Great Recession. I kept some of the seasonality in there so you can actually see how bumpy it is along the way on sort of a monthly basis. But it still has that same bowl shape effect that we saw at the national level. And to a certain extent, the California economy drives what happens at the national level. But this is the momentum that we saw in California. Same type of deal, sharp cut, little bit of flatness, then moving up over summer and fall to curl over a little bit. Same deal. For true recovery, we need that black line to move more toward the red dotted line. And these data are reported, except for this month, on a monthly basis by EDD, so you can track it month by month to sort of watch it walk almost like a dashboard of how we are doing in recovery. This is the state overall. Now, let's look at Sacramento, MSA. So again, these are the 4 counties together: Sacramento, Placer, El Dorado, and Yolo. Same bowl shape. I, again, kept the seasonality in there, but the same cut during the Great Recession and a very similar look for the 4 counties in terms of recovery. Same deal, black line toward red line for true recovery, but there's a theme growing here, okay? Here's Butte County. This, I actually stripped some of the seasonality out because it kind of gets in the way. It looks, it'll make you, you know, not want to look at it because it's so jagged. But same kind of bowl shape, long recovery period, over 100 months to get back to square versus Sacramento, which was a lot less, and California, which was a lot less, but kind of the same recovery look, okay? That, and I should stop here, that 93.2, it means we're 93.2% back to where we started 2020 with respect to the total amount of people working in this area. So Butte County is a little lower than Sacramento, which was a little higher than the state on average. Here's Shasta County. I don't know why it says median home price growth. That's on me. I apologize. That's the wrong header. But that's, I want to stop here with Shasta because something's going on here. Notice the blue line never quite got back in Shasta County. There was a structural change in Shasta County's economy after the Great Recession because construction had built up such a large portion of that county's economy that it sagged structurally and never really recovered. And you can see on the far right-hand side, if you look at that blue line, the peeling away is really the black line seasonally adjusted. And you can see that the line, the black line is about 95% back. So in fact, Shasta County, which is true generally of rural California, has done a little bit better on average in recovery in terms of getting back to where it started. But for most of rural California, it also started at a little lower space or a little lower situation than the state on average with respect to jobs and the types of jobs it was generating. For many places in rural California, there was still a hangover from the Great Recession, unfortunately. Okay, here's Yuba and Sutter counties. Now, my header correct again. Same type of deal, even though in Yuba and Sutter, we saw because when Sacramento started to pick back up, there was some, in a sense, ripple effect that started to hit Yuba and Sutter counties. But this is what it looks like in those counties. Those counties have been hit a little bit more hard, if you will, in this recession, and have seen a little bit more of a curl away from where it wants to be in terms of recovery. Again, black line toward red line, about 88.5% there rather than somewhere in the mid 90s. But when you add all these up, the point behind all these graphs together is that they are telling a common theme. This recession has been a general recession, meaning that all industries have been hit, with specific industries hit a little bit harder, where the last recession sort of had this rolling window of problems. Started in construction effects started to fade when other parts of the economy then got hurt because of that sort of ripple effect out from construction. This time, everybody kind of went down, and then some of us picked back up. Construction just happened to be one of those industries that picked back up a little faster, which is good in some ways. In the travel industry, things are still very bad, and the outlook is not very good, unfortunately, for the next couple of years. And I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. Okay, I want to show you the same industrial look, thinking about California as a whole, and I'm going to compare this to the regional look in just a minute. This is April. You can see here these industries since the original cut in April, then May, June, July, August, September, October, November. And so this is the recovery momentum across all these industries in California. Then December hit, and we gave some of that back. And we should expect January to also be a time for give back. Now let's look to the far right. In the far right, you can see that leisure and hospitality, which is basically a mix of hotels, motels, restaurants, still about 30% of the jobs that were there last December 2019, I'm sorry, are gone December 2020. In other services, hair salons, nail salons, a bunch of other personal services, about 1 in 5 jobs are gone. Now, if you look 3 buckets over, moving left to right, you see construction. Construction is actually positive growth and had slowly crept up over time. What that 0.2% means, it means that 0.2% of jobs have grown since 1 year previous. Or if you had 100 jobs, you've now got 100.2 jobs at the end of this year, which is good. If you look across the way, there's very few industries that by the end of December had actually seen positive growth from the previous year. Construction was one of them. Two major reasons. We have seen continued construction, and there was declared essential industries, which did not slow construction down for a very long time in terms of the state overall, right out of the gate. And there you can see that in that shaded area. Now I want to show you the Sacramento MSA because it's really the best, biggest example where we can show some breakdowns and some consistency. Same deal. Here's April and May, most of the pain in Sacramento. Then June, July, August, September, October, November. So you can see there's recovery across most of these industries. Leisure and hospitality, other services where most of the pain has lingered. And then December, construction again, looking pretty good. It's in that shaded area, 1.8% growth, December to December. The highest percentage growth of all the industries that we're showing here. And again, it's because construction's had a lot of support during this recession, which is much different than what happened in the last recession. The other thing to think about is the speed at which things have happened. Last time it took about 18 months to go from the top of the hill to the bottom of the hill. This time it took about 18 weeks. So think about that in terms of the economics and decision-making that's taken place. And that's why things have seemed so quick and in a sense, so large in terms of how policy has reacted. Okay. Now I'm going to try to show you all these areas at once, just thinking about December. So this is California. We saw these data already. So this is December 2020 looking back to December 2019 and the percentage change in jobs. There's that 0.2% come back for construction. Here's Sacramento. Here's Yuba and Sutter County. So Yuba and Sutter County, like we talked about earlier, together really lost initially a lot of momentum as the recession began and had not, in some cases, especially in farming, and some other industries have not come back very well, even though in personal services, they've seen some really strong comeback. There's Butte County and there's Shasta County. So this gives you a comparison regionally, thinking Sacramento North, of how things have shifted. But again, how construction, even though it's negative in a couple of places, has really shown general strength among all these industries. Now I'm going to give you some warnings in just a minute as I start to wrap up. But for now, the state of affairs is pretty good. Okay. And you can see that shaded area for construction again. This is a forecast looking in California through the end of 2024. So the Department of Finance puts out this labor market forecast as part of the governor's budget, and I'm on the team that helps them finalize this, which has been a humbling experience. It's been fun to do that. But there's the Great Recession. Sorry, I don't want to go too fast. Here's the Great Recession. You can see the employment level starting to fade. And then you can see this long growth over the last decade, peaking at 110.5, meaning about 10.5% growth from the time right before the Great Recession. So cleaning up all that recovery and then growing, then a sharp cut, and then this long, slow movement of jobs in California back to where we just get back at the end of 2024. So I told you earlier, the national forecast is to have jobs come back to where we were at the end of or the beginning of 2020, around the end of 2023. Department of Finance in California thinks it's not going to be until the end of 2024 for California. Now, as I said what seems like a long time ago, but about 15 minutes ago, generally speaking, the labor market has beat economists' forecasts. So we will see if that continues. And this has been put out there as a relatively pessimistic look at the labor market. The idea is that we still have a long way to go. And those industries, especially in travel, leisure and hospitality and other services, the forecasts for those industries are not good. Okay, and this is the current recession here in terms of understanding where we are. Okay, now let's start thinking about these industries by starting with what's been going on in housing. So housing has been a bright spot. This is the growth of housing prices at the median, looking from December 2020 back 1 year and back 2 years. This is the 1 year growth in prices. These are very robust for a recession situation. But what's been going on? Low interest rates, high rental prices, high income workers have basically kept their economic situation, or in fact bettered it, because the equity markets have remained relatively robust and they've been investing in housing. This is the 2 year look. So most of the growth over the last 2 years has really happened in the last 12 months, which is kind of counterintuitive given that we've had recession. Okay, so take that picture, because a lot of what is now starting to build up as potential construction momentum is built into these data. Here is the forecast, and I'm showing you all 58 counties and the state of California so you can find where you live here. But I picked out a couple and tried to highlight them in such a way to focus your eyes on those. The green column is Butte County. The yellow column without the sort of darker outline is Shasta. The dark outline is Yuba. Sutter is something that looks a bit on the brown side, and then black is Sacramento. There's really no county in California that has a negative forecast of median home prices for the next 12 months, but none are really, like, let's say, separating from each other wildly. And the state overall is a little bit over 6%. The point, with low interest rates continuing and economic recovery momentum in place, we should expect there to be a pickup with respect to housing prices. However, that split in the labor market is something that is both a problem and a potential opportunity. The problem is that we're seeing a split that leaves lower income households still lingering with relatively high unemployment. So there's a website called tracktherecovery.org, which is a partnership between Brown University, Harvard University, and the Gates Foundation to try to real-time track how the economy is doing. The split here for California, and the best data right now are really at the state level. Those are high income and middle income jobs, and high income in these comparisons is $60,000 or more per annum per person. And you can see that split versus the low income jobs, which are here. So high wage workers have basically recovered. We saw about 2% growth of jobs by the end of November in California versus the previous, or basically versus January 2020, where for lower wage workers, those that make $27,000 or less, about 27% down from the beginning of January. Now, why this is important is because the recovery in some ways is bifurcated with respect to how much you earn and the types of jobs that are coming back. Those job losses we saw before in terms of leisure and hospitality, other services, a very large portion of those jobs are relatively low wage. So we know we have rising government demand. That's why we're hearing in Fiscal Stimulus 3 that there's going to be some money for cities and counties to help. We know nonprofit demand is up. We are concerned about apartment and rental vacancies in general, because we don't know if those lower wage workers are going to be able to stay in their homes. And there's a lot of eviction moratoria that have still lingered around, which is good for renters, is a little tricky for landlords. But it's what I hear from commercial real estate is that things are sort of working themselves out on the ground, which is good, I guess, for now. But we have to get those lower wage workers picked up at some point. I'll come back to the importance of that in just a second. And at the end of the day, we're really concerned about how we're going to see people get hired back. Because the longer that I can't get a job locally, the more I think about out migration, which then again changes the labor force. That's why I brought up those labor force data before as well, because we got to be thinking this isn't just some magic wand that's going to come by and preserve all those jobs and all those workers. We have to think, if we don't get economic recovery soon, if you want to rehire, you may struggle to rehire, because there's going to be people who are going to look up for other places that are recovering a little more quickly. Another piece of data that tracktherecovery.org watches is small business changes, or which ones remain open. This actually has a little bit more robust data at the local level, and you can see it's all kind of grouping here among the three I'm showing you. This is for Sacramento County, Yuba County, and Butte County to really show you that even though those are three very different counties in a lot of ways, small business, think 25 people or less working for that business, have really sunk in terms of being able to stay open. So with those low numbers, one thing we don't know is, are those places permanently closed or temporarily closed? That's a key thing. And the data don't tell us that, but it does tell us some things to think about. One, what industries should we support when we think about new funding? So PPP round 2, should we have a little more focus? And we have. But when cities and counties get money, will they invest in businesses because they're trying to keep specific businesses open? Will it matter 12 months from now? If I give them money, great. You kept me open for 6 months, but if the economic conditions don't turn, does that mean I'll close in 12 months? What happens to that with that investment? Basically, the ROI is zero. How do they ultimately affect commercial real estate? So when you start thinking about energy jobs, construction, utilities jobs, the fate of commercial real estate, or the fate of the use of commercial real estate, whether it's new construction or existing construction that then turns into tenant improvements because we want to change things around. If we don't come back to the office, there's going to be a much larger, which it already is, a much larger focus on residential real estate in terms of the demand characteristics moving forward. And that's something to think about in terms of labor force and being able to react to people potentially looking at more home construction and or improvements of their home, because that now is going to become their workplace. So when you think about all those data as context and what that means for these industries, there are some challenges. We don't know what kind of shadow effect the recession is going to have, and ultimately the slowness, or maybe hopefully the speediness of an economic recovery is going to have going forward. We know the cost of doing business is going to rise. Does that increase in cost of doing business slow down rehiring? It's an open question. For a lot of businesses in terms of construction, we don't know, for example, if we're going to see some slowdown in revenues because there's going to be fewer projects. We don't know if there's going to be less deferred maintenance. We don't know if there's going to be less tenant improvements. Because if you think about this concentric circles around decision making, well, we see a slowdown overall in construction demand, not because the projects are not currently in the pipeline, but because new projects are not going to come on as fast in the next 3 or 4 years. And it's really that longer vision that's important. And we may have some lingering issues in terms of social policy and the reticence of anybody to want to invest because they just don't know what the next policy choice is going to be. The opportunities out there is that we are hearing a lot about climate change and a lot of investment there. We will see if the next round of fiscal policy or some fiscal policy in the next 2 years focuses on energy markets and wanting to expand those. Will we see things like biomass suddenly get more focus? Will we have more demand for electrician jobs and really just generally construction jobs because we're going to start putting more infrastructure in place? I'll come back to this in the last one. But let's move through these industries briefly, and then you're going to hand it off to Ebony in just a minute. Same type of deal, but now I'm going to focus a little bit more on the ECU industries. Here's construction and the evolution. And we saw these data already, right? There's that 0.2% on the far right-hand side. This is April through December. Now, if I look at residential building construction, that's really driving a lot of it because on the commercial side, things have not increased as fast. Now, remember, this is just one section of construction, not all of it. But we have seen at least some speed here in terms of continued building construction, which has been good. That's driven a lot of construction jobs remaining in place. On the heavy side, which was one of the salvations of the Great Recession, here's those construction data as a whole. Again, this is the other main side of the labor market with respect to construction. This is thinking of the super heavy construction. Then we have utility systems, land, as the case may be when you subdivide and people are working out there, highway construction, which continues because projects are still in place and we've still seen some hiring there, and then an amalgam of other areas. But the point here is that this is where things have sagged a little bit, except for, let's say, the highway construction versus building construction. Now, a lot of that's because of the way projects work. And so one of the sort of, tea leaf things here is how much longer is this going to have inside if we have a slowdown on the building side and government does not make that investment, which is the blue column here. Something to watch going forward. On the individual contractor side, this is basically the split. There's that construction data again. And now we saw, on the building side, when you see these exterior contractors, this is where a lot of the pain initially hit. Then we have equipment operators, finishing contractors, a lot of that slowness because of the nature of how we worked, had to be outside. So being inside was tricky initially. And then an array of specialty contractors. So on the firm side, things were a lot better than, let's say, on the individual contractor side, but things have picked up, which is good. Those specialty contractors, which is an array of different types of contractors in the trades, those are one of the nasty hotspots that we got to watch very closely. If we look at utilities in terms of how they've been hiring, pretty stable. So really didn't lose much in utilities over the recession thus far, and generally the grids and the distribution piece, we've seen workers keep in their jobs, which has been good. There's been a little bit of sag here over the last couple of months, but the percentage change isn't that much. And natural gas hasn't really changed. If you think about the split between electricity and natural gas as being the two main utility subsectors. So on the utility side, things have remained good. I'll come back when I talk about this in just a second. And to wrap up, here's a forecast. So Department of Finance also looks at construction industries, but when we think about this, we want to think about, is there some leading indicator? Well, if I look at permits, here's valuation of construction, and here is permitted units. And you can see this is from 2004 on an annual basis, big run up before the Great Recession, big sag, and then they started to walk hand in hand in terms of the percentage evolution because things were very slow and steady in terms of new residential units. And so this is all about residential units, thinking that this is a driver of construction employment, which has historically been the case. So regardless of the array of what's going on out there in ECU industries, if you watch what goes on with residential units, that's generally a good way to look forward in terms of jobs demand. Okay. Let's wrap up. One of the things that a lot of people are hanging their hat on is a Green New Deal. The Biden administration wants to make heavy investment in electricity. Oh, I shouldn't say electricity, but energy markets to reduce our carbon footprint. Well, we see that come out in a bunch of different ways. Changing grids, change in where we do charging stations for electric vehicles, the changes in augmentation of the way we do residential and commercial construction. California is kind of a poster child for all this happening, but how large of an investment is going to happen and how much does that really leave on the table for hiring? Well, there's going to be a wide array of opportunities out there. And so one of the things that you're going to hear a lot about from Ebony is what's going on with the occupations, but those lower wage workers, the nastiness about having a lingering large amount of unemployment is that those folks are in trouble in terms of everyday lives. They are, however, a pool of potential entrants into something like ECU if they're trained. And that becomes more important because just like before the Great Recession, we've had another 10 or 12 years where contractors have gotten older and the age profile of our contractor pool has changed again. So we may find that that pool of people who do not see getting their jobs back become very good candidates to get trained and come in to ECU careers, because that's really where the growth is going to be. And we may find that we are learning from disasters and there's going to be this sort of lingering, I guess, demand, if you will, for post-disaster / disaster prevention industries that spring up, because we're learning things, what's going on in Texas right now. We've also learned from the last 4 or 5 years in California. Will we see that industry remain as a place that people can get jobs in ECU industries? We will see. So folks, with that, I'm done. Thank you again for having me. Hopefully that provides a context, not only for what Ebony's going to tell you, but really for planning and thinking about when you think about curricula, when you think about the types of students that are going to come demanding programs, and in general, what's going to happen with these industries. That's a good way of thinking about it in context and outlook.
Thank you, Dr. Eyler. And I want to just briefly, I did not do a full introduction for you, and I'm going to do that post your presentation in my zeal to get started. So who you just heard from was Dr. Robert Eyler, Interim Associate Vice President of Government Relations and Professor of Economics at Sonoma State University, where he's been teaching since 1995. He earned a PhD from the University of California, Davis in 1998 and a BA in economics at CSU Chico in 1992. Dr. Eyler also serves on the board of directors of Redwood Credit Union, an $8 billion nonprofit financial cooperative. He is a visiting scholar at both the University of Bologna, if I'm saying that correctly, and Stanford University. He's married with one daughter and a native of Sonoma County, California. And his family have been sheep and cattle ranchers in Marin and Sonoma counties since 1910. And Dr. Eyler is a coveted speaker and presenter because of his way of presenting economics in an approachable way and also to present rapidly. So we really appreciate you being here today.
Sure.
We have a few questions that were presented in the chat. So I'm going to ask Randy Young if you want to unmute yourself first and ask what you had 1 or 2 questions. If you want to go ahead and bring that forward. See if Randy is there.
Yeah, my first question was how much of the labor force reduction is from hospitality and the restaurant industry, and your slides actually showed that. And I'm in building and construction, and I don't think my own guesstimation that workforce is going to be coming back anytime soon. My second question was on the housing prices. Do you think that, is there any data to suggest that the areas that were hit by the wildfires are part of the reason for the lag in that area?
Oh, sure. So I think you're correct. And this is why I bring it up that way, that I think we're going to have a latent labor force that is not going to find a job easily for a little while because the original employer of those workers may not exist anymore, or just simply will not have enough demand to rehire them quickly. So you should expect that there's going to be a labor force that's there, but also thinking about migration. So getting them trained up or advertising through those industry portals, I think, is a smart play in terms of trying to drum up and see if people want to make career change. There's no doubt that the places affected by wildfire are still have also a sort of a second shadow effect on them. Most notably Butte County, with respect to what happened with Paradise. So I live in Sonoma County, where after the 2017 fire here, we saw a wild, quick pickup of building permits and very obvious construction. Butte County was slowly marching that direction, and then COVID hit. So there's no doubt about the fact that when you've been affected by wildfire, especially places like Butte County, that's going to have a lingering effect on recovery in the short term if you are not able to get back to work in rebuilding. If it triggers more rebuilding, which is possible, it should help accelerate growth, but it hasn't quite happened yet for Butte County.
Okay, and then I could probably add a little bit to the training of new industries. I have several different hats in the role that I have. I work with a lot of the IOUs as a PRG to review all their public contracts for energy efficiency work. And there's a big push right now to train, retain disadvantaged workers into the workforce for energy efficiency upgrades. The problem is that a lot of the companies that do this work are not willing to pay what is required.
No.
So something has to happen with equity in order to move the needle, in my mind. And I think with the carbon reduction push that's going on in the state of California, there's huge opportunities to train and retrain some of these workers that have lost these projects, but it's going to have to take some pretty significant policy changes to make that happen. Just food for thought.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Great point.
We also have a question from Corey Fisk. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. Corey, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm just trying to figure out.
It's no problem.
Okay, good. You can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
So it really wasn't a question. It was more of just a food for thought, in the sense of, because of the lack of materials that we have, because of the fires that have destroyed any of our products. I mean, I'm having contractors turn down work and not wanting to build homes because they do not know whether or not they're going to be able to make the profit margin necessary until that trend shows where the housing market is going to be. And I mean, that's probably smaller contractors, not your residential developers, but I'm just, that's what I'm seeing.
That I'm saying the same thing. And so one of the things that's a little bit, pardon me, it's a little bit tricky is you see those data and you say, wow, look at all that housing price growth. A lot of that is a shuffling internally of the market, and the incentives to actually build more homes, given the rebuild and the sort of reallocation of inputs with respect to, you know, gaining access to materials, gaining access to workers, and actually making a profit based on all the cost push that's happened. I mean, the commodities markets, for example, rising in price have not helped construction either. And with oil prices, you know, marching back up, that's another increase in cost that contractors are going to have to think about. And does that ultimately price people out of wanting to do a project, even though the ROI might be there? If their intention is not to turn around and sell that asset, they may be a little reticent, given, okay, we've seen all this asset price increase. I don't know if it's going to be sustainable, and cost is rising simultaneously. So will that slow down demand? So that I'm hearing that same story.
Thank you.
Great point you made.
Yeah, thank you. And I see some additional comments and questions related to housing prices, and some comments from different building industry individuals who are on the call. In the interest of time, we're going to move on into to the agenda to have Ebony Benzing, the research manager from the North Far North Center of Excellence, present the labor market data. Thank you again, Dr. Eyler, and we're going to turn it over to Ebony at this time.
Hey. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ebony Joy Benzing. I'm the research manager for the North for North Center of Excellence. Today, I am here to share some labor market data regarding jobs in the ECU sector. And my intent is really just to focus on the jobs themselves and the training assets that we have in the region. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit about the Centers of Excellence for Labor Market Research. There are 8 centers throughout the state that serve 9 regions, as well as a statewide center. Our collective mission is to provide labor market data and analyses to support community colleges in planning and implementing career education programs. We also provide other types of special analyses, such as in-depth sector reviews. And during the pandemic, we've been releasing a regional economic report about the impacts of the pandemic on our areas. Next slide, please. So the types of work that we typically engage in are focused on three primary questions. What is the employment outlook for students participating in a particular program? What skills and credentials are needed for entry into the labor market? And what programs look ripe for investment based on what's happening in our local labor markets? We look at multiple indicators for the market, ranging from industry data to occupational and job data, job postings, etc. The goal here is to use data to better understand the conditions in our area. Next slide, please. So our research really provides just one part of the puzzle when it comes to career education planning. Other components are just as valuable, if not more valuable, to form a complete picture of what's needed for our students to pick up the much needed knowledge, skills, and abilities for jobs in the region that pay well. The work that you're engaging in here today, the conversations that you're having, will add to our collective understanding of the system. Next slide, please. So as stated before, I'm going to present data that will give you an idea of the near future of jobs in the ECU sector across the greater Sacramento region. I'm going to start with a definition of ECU, and that definition is based off of how the community college system tends to view that sector. And then we'll take a look at some broad sector data, occupational data, job postings, and we'll examine some college programs and awards. To make this a little bit more interactive, feel free to type your questions into the box. If something comes up during the presentation, Renee is going to alert me because I'm like looking down at my notes, and I can take things as they come. Thanks. Next slide, please. So, next slide. ECU is a really big sector for the community college system. The definition that I'm using here today is based on the previous framework under the Doing What Matters initiative that came from the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office a few years ago. The framework defines ECU as encompassing 57 specific industries, ranging from energy generation and distribution to all aspects of residential, commercial, and major infrastructure construction, and includes almost anything having to do with utilities such as telecommunications, water, sewer, and waste management. This chart also shows the number of occupations and top coded programs at the 6-digit level, community college speak there a little bit, aligned to the sector. The 260 occupations are typically representative of what we might think of when it comes to careers in ECU, and have broad educational requirements for entry-level work. So that includes jobs that require like at a minimum of high school diploma all the way up to like anything that might require a master's or a doctorate degree. And the community college programs in the ECU sector can be established under one of 24 available top codes. This is not the same as the number of programs that we have in our region, which I'll get into later. Next slide, please. So here we have a high-level snapshot of employment, earnings, and businesses related to ECU in the greater Sacramento region. This data has been adjusted to reflect changes due to the pandemic. I did a little bit of a calculation just for the sector myself, just to see how much change actually occurred when they were revising these numbers. And I noticed that there was less than 0.1% change in the jobs numbers. And this is between my current data set that I have access to and my previous data set. So it's a really small change. It could really be literally just due to noise. So there hasn't been really that much of a revision. Things have declined, but not significantly. My observations on this are really far from complete. I'm actually looking at the other sectors as well, just to have an understanding about how these values have changed between the data sets, but it's going to take me a little bit more time to do that. So getting back to the data at hand, in 2019, we had about 117,000 jobs in the ECU sector in the 7-county North region. The 7-county region includes El Dorado, Nevada, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. These jobs are projected to grow by 9% over the next 5 years, which is more than double the region's overall growth rate of 4%. So between 2019 and 24, all jobs in the Sacramento area is projected to grow about 4%, or we'll see 4% growth in jobs. The ECU sector is projected to add more than 10,000 new jobs in the region by 2024. And in 2019, the average earnings per job were just over $84,000. This value is calculated based on all jobs in the sector and all earnings in the sector. So this includes every class of worker who might be found there, from office clerks to high-level executives. So there's quite a bit of variability when you start thinking about, hey, what does this actually mean and who's actually making this dollar amount? But this average earnings per job is higher than the median Sacramentan household income of about $65,000. So that's significant. And last, the ECU sector was estimated to hold about, or just over 8,000 businesses related to ECU in 2020. Next slide, please. So,
Ebony, there is a question
yes.
about how apprenticeships fit in. Where do state-approved apprenticeship programs fit in?
So I can address that a little bit more when it comes to the programs. So I'll make a note for myself.
Thank you.
1 second. Okay. All right, so this table here shows the current and projected demand for ECU subsectors. The subsector definitions are based on the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS, and represent the industries listed in the tables at the end of this presentation. So when you get these slides, I highly encourage you just to kind of go and take a look at all of my reference materials at the end of this presentation so you understand what I'm talking about here. Construction is the largest subsector of ECU, with about 80% of the jobs of the sector, followed by architectural, engineering, and related services, which is around 10% of the jobs in the sector. Most subsectors are projected to grow in jobs over the next 5 years, with growth rates similar to or above that of the region. Most of them are above the region. Architectural and engineering and related services is at that regional job growth rate of 4%. The exception to this is telecommunications. This is the only subsector in the ECU that's projected to lose or decline in jobs over the next 5 years, showing about a 20% decline over the next 5 years. You can also see that the average earnings vary significantly based on the subsector, with utilities at almost 190,000 all the way down to a low or lower value of about $70,000 in waste management and remediation. Some other information included on this slide are the number of establishments that are coded underneath each of these industry subsectors. So for construction, you can see there's just over 6,700 businesses associated with construction in our region, whereas there are about 61 businesses established related to utilities in our region. Something I want to bring your attention to is this interesting column that I always include in my slides, and it's the 2019 location quotients. So location quotient gives us an idea of the concentration of jobs in our region relative to national levels. They hint to us if something is very, like, I guess, specialized or higher concentration compared to national levels. If we see a value around 1 or close to 1, we can assume that it's average and it's consistent with what's happening nationally. But when we see values that are significantly above that or below that, we can start to make some assumptions. So for instance, construction is at a value of 1.33, about 33% higher than national average, which gives us an idea like, hey, there's some specialization happening in our region. And this speaks back to what Dr. Eyler was presenting in his report about our economy. But then we also see telecom is at 0.63, which is significantly below that 1 level, hinting at, hey, there's something interesting happening here. We don't have that much employment concentrated here. It could be due to the lower number of jobs, but if we look at waste management and remediation, which has a similar value, that's almost at 1. So that might be an industry to kind of pay attention to see what's happening, especially given the average earnings per job.
Ebony, there's a question about the average earnings in the utility sector seems high, and what jobs are included in utilities?
So it's all jobs in utilities, and it ranges from, you have like your low wage workers to your top level executives. So it's everybody's jobs and it's all earnings in that industry subsector. So average earnings is something that I don't tend to report on, just because it can be very skewed based off of who makes what and where employment is concentrated. But it still just gives us kind of a nice picture of what's happening a little bit for these sectors, and a good way to kind of gauge, hey, how might our workers fare in these industries? Okay.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Awesome. So here we have the ECU workforce demographics from back in 2019. So just under half of the workforce identifies as non-white or multi-ratio. So about 45% of the workers are in those categories, whereas 55% of the workers identify as white. In terms of gender parity, ECU jobs are held by workers who identify as male. About 80% of the workforce are male. And now there may be some issues with retirement risks. If you take a look at that graph in the upper right-hand part of my slide, it shows the breakdown of the workforce based on age cohort. And we see that about 24% of the workers in the workforce are in that 55 and up age group, indicating, you know, some retirements happening and opening spaces for workers that are going to be needed in this sector. Next slide, please. Now for some occupational levels. So this is at the other data was kind of industry focused. This is more at the level of the jobs themselves. So the types of jobs that exist in the sector, about 85% of the employment is found in 5 major occupational groups: construction, management, office and administrative support. You've got installation, maintenance, repair, and architecture and engineering. The other 15% are distributed across 18 other occupational groups. So this is really important to pay attention to here, because when we start thinking about training needs in the region, I'm not saying that that 15% doesn't deserve like an intense focus, but in terms of where we start to get more bang for our investment and whatnot, we can look at this and see, hey, how are we investing in programs related to these areas, and are we meeting those needs? Next slide, please. So this here big table shows a breakdown of the data that I showed you in the pie chart. There's a lot of information in this table, so I'm going to encourage you, once you get these slides, to take a closer look. But for now, I'm going to explain what's in here and then point out some key data points. So this table shows what I've considered to be critical occupations within the ECU sector. I'm considering these as critical occupational groups just because they represent about 80% of the employment in the ECU sector. We have groups like construction trade workers, we have certain management positions, we have office and administrative support, we have people who are workers in the installation, maintenance, and repair kind of occupations. So these occupational groups within them have more detailed occupations that have a variety of educational needs kind of associated with them. So when we start thinking about what we need to train for, we've got to start to consider those entry-level educational requirements. So for each occupational group, the table shows job counts in the sector. So that's the middle column, as well as job counts in the entire greater Sacramento region. So the job counts in the sector are a proportion of the jobs in the entire region. There's a calculation that shows what share of jobs is found in the sector compared to the region. And there's job projections data for the next 5 years, including average annual openings. So some key points, unsurprisingly, at the top of the table, construction trades workers represent 90% of the regions, 90% of the jobs are found within ECU. So we have employment at almost 55,000 within the sector. Jobs for this group are projected to grow 9% over the next 5 years and have an estimated 7,000 openings each year between 2019 and 2024. So these construction trades workers include workers that are engaging in carpentry and plumbing and things like that. So this is kind of harkening back to that apprenticeship question that came up. So what is the demand for apprentice type positions in construction? That's what we're looking at there. If we look at this table overall, and especially at the bottom total line, overall, ECU holds about 1/3 of the region's jobs for these workers. And there's projected 34,000 openings per year over the next 5 years for these occupational groups. Just to kind of put that in context, ECU job openings represent about 1/4 of the region's total openings over the next 5 years. So a significant chunk of jobs are projected to be in this sector alone compared to all other industries in the region.
Ebony, a couple questions related to where does HVAC fall under on this slide, and also where would jobs in solar or alternative energy fit?
Okay, so thinking off the top of my head, because I don't have my numbers on here, HVAC is either going to fall under construction trades or it might fall under installation, maintenance, and repair occupations. I'm trying to remember the exact number for it, but I can come back a little bit more conclusively at the end of the presentation after I look it up. And the other one was, Renee, what was it?
Alternative energy and solar.
It depends. I'll come back more conclusively at the end of the presentation with that.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you. And when we do send out Ebony's slides, there's some methodology and data and TOPS codes that will be included with that, so you can see where she pulled the information from, which might provide the level of detail some of you are looking for.
Yeah, and as always, my information is at the end, so if you have questions, more questions, please send me emails. I'm very fast on email. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so next I want to show some job postings data. So my job postings data comes from this app called Burning Glass Labor Insights, which is an online job postings aggregator. This data gives us insight into who and what local employers are looking for. So while not all jobs are posted online, data analysis has shown that online job postings are significantly representative of the entire job posting universe. Something like 90% of job postings can be found online. There are still places that don't post online, but these jobs that I'm looking at here are representative of the ones that don't necessarily make it online, or can be considered representative. So for the ECU sector itself, I found 16,500 new jobs posted online between January 1 of 2020, there's a typo there, and January 31st of this year. So the last 13 months. And this is based off of an industry definition for ECU that I alluded to earlier and is also in the references at the end of this presentation. Caveat about this, I want to point something out. Job postings are not necessarily the same as the number of hiring positions. So when we start thinking about how many workers or employers hiring for, job postings data doesn't necessarily give us, it just tells us, hey, this employer had a job posting for this position and it relates to this occupation, but I'm not necessarily sure how many positions they're actually hiring for based off that one posting. But still just gives an idea about what's happening in our region. Okay, next slide, please. So here we have the job posting trends for the ECU sector over the last 10 years, last decade. So this picks up in 2010, following the Great Recession, where we know construction was hit construction, which is a huge component of ECU, was hit really hard, and then it travels all the way up to the end of January 31st of this year. So overall, we notice that there is an increase in job postings, hinting at some increase in hiring activity in our region. So employers are looking most definitely for people to come into roles associated in their companies as it relates to ECU. If we focus in at the last part of this graph from January 2020 to January 2021, that's just the last 13 months, there has been a slight decline, 16% job decline in job postings. But if we compare that section to the last decade, job postings overall are up in our region. So lots of activity happening and things happening in this sector. Okay, next slide, please. So here we have some top 10s. These are the top 10 employers, occupation, and job titles. I typically stick with top 10s because there is typically a super long list when it comes to these things. I can have like 500, upwards of 500 employers, which I can't fit into this presentation, but if you're curious what's beyond this, send me an email. So these are the categories that had the most job postings over the last 13 months. So during the pandemic, what's happening, who's been posting for jobs and who's been looking for workers. We see that some of our top employers are TJG, civil engineers and commercial construction on there. We have Laro Building Systems. We have a school district who's also looking for workers in this industry. Now, keep in mind, this is still fairly representative of all the jobs that can be found in ECU. It may not be like they're looking for, it may not be looking specifically for like a carpenter or something like that. They may be looking for other things that are associated with this sector. Top occupations with the most job postings include construction managers, civil engineers. We have sales representatives, which is going to come up in one of my slides in the future around hard to fill jobs in the solar industry, electricians, and some other positions on here. We also have HVAC on here as one of the job postings, as one of the occupations with the most job postings over the last 13 months. Top job titles are hinting towards some of the more emerging occupations that I don't traditionally have LMI for just yet because they're emerging to us. This is kind of like a new category. So for instance, project manager, that's a new occupational category for me. And we're just starting to see data being collected on the occupation that might give us some more insight into future needs and whatnot. We also have another construction project manager, a lot of management type positions. There's the journeyman electrician, hinting at some apprenticeship things that need to kind of come through, as well as HVAC on here as well, and carpenter. Next slide, please. So here we have the most desired skills of those 16,000 job postings. I've broken it down into 3 areas. We have specialized skills, which speak to the very specific skills related to ECU. And then we have foundational, which can be thought of as soft skills. And we have technology skills. These are the things that employers are looking for. So specialized skills that are coming up the most in our job postings include things like project management, civil engineering, construction management, plumbing, and knowledge of and how to use AutoCAD. Foundational skills, these are always very similar across any industry or occupation that I look at when it comes to job searching. Employers are looking for workers with good communication skills, workers who are detail oriented, workers who are organized and can organize different aspects of work, workers who are team workers and collaborators. So that list is fairly consistent across most job postings that I encounter. Similarly, technology skills, this is fairly consistent, though we do have some specialized technology popping up as it relates to ECU. So like basic tech skills in Excel, Microsoft Office, Word, and PowerPoint, but then also having an understanding of AutoCAD and Civil 3D and Revit. Next slide, please. Okay. Now,
Just a little bit of a time check, Ebony. We're running a little long, so if it's possible to just kind of move
Speed it up
a
a little
tiny
bit.
bit quicker. Thank you.
okay, cool, can do. All right, so here we have the most requested education experience coming from employers. Overwhelmingly, employers in our region are looking for workers that either have high school or vocational training, which is consistent with community college offerings, or a bachelor degree, even though 41% of job postings didn't have some kind of specified educational level. In terms of experience, employers are looking for workers who fall into that 0 to 5 years, that light blue and orange category. So workers that have 0 to 5 years of experience. Next slide, please. All right, so this one I wanted to point out, this is hard to fill jobs in the region, and these are jobs related to the ECU sector. So in our region, 3 jobs kind of rose to the top for hard to fill based off of how long it takes to fill these jobs compared to a national level. Solar photovoltaic installers and solar cells representatives and assessors. So employers looking for these workers are listed in that box on the lower left-hand side of the screen. Another hard to fill job were electrical power line installers and repairers. So when I think about programs that we need to look at around training for and make sure that we have workers coming out of for in our region, these are some of the occupations that need to be focused on. Next slide, please. Okay, so community college training. So here we have a slide that just shows the training inventory, program inventory for the community colleges in our region. Not all community colleges are listed because all community colleges do not offer an ECU related program. The C's indicate if there's a certificate offered for that particular program, which is in the blue bands and at the top in the middle of the screen. And the D indicates if there's an associate's degree. So most categories, all categories are covered by some community college in our region. Next slide, please. So overall, this shows the breakdown of the 5-year average of awards in ECU by program type. In the last 5 years, community colleges have conferred an average of 313 awards. In these categories here, and you can see the average breakdown for each program. Next slide, please. And this one is a breakdown. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I want to make sure that I can address whatever questions are coming up, but feel free to take a look at this when you have a chance. Okay, I think that's it. Oh, sorry. So other considerations, things I would like to point out for you guys. So things that we need to consider when it comes to the ECU sector. In spring of 2020, Valley Vision collaborated with the Center of Excellence and the Regional Workforce Boards to release a report focused on the impact of AI and automation on jobs in the capital region. The recent report was really timely given what was happening with the pandemic, and it focused on the impact of AI and automation on jobs in the capital region. So the findings of the report outline who would be most impacted by automation, and that is workers with lower levels of education, workers in low-wage jobs, women, and historically minoritized workers. We also know from other reports, most notably the 2017 Brookings study conducted on behalf of Valley Vision for the Sacramento region, that certain residents, like Black and Latino residents, are less likely to have the levels of digital and technical skills needed to compete in a fast-changing economic environment. So with all that said, the future of work is really going to require us as educators and as industry people to focus on both upskilling and reskilling for people in our economies. Upskilling is when workers gain new skills to do the work required in their current jobs, and reskilling is when workers need new skills to take on entirely different jobs. The pandemic has accelerated trends related to AI and automation. And we are seeing things happening in the ECU sector in particular. We're seeing drones being brought in. We're seeing automated heavy machinery being developed for use in this field. So we have a challenge here. We have groups of workers and residents who are not able to keep up with these changes and who are and are still being left behind. With that said, I think it's really important for you guys to consider the context of ECU training as it relates to AI and automation and how we are capturing those people who are falling through the gaps. We also need to be focusing on technology-proof skills for these workers. What are the skills that are going to enable workers to be resilient in a fast-changing environment? So that's going to end my spiel right there. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and that's it.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ebony, and I appreciate your ability to answer questions on the fly. I think you've kept up with everything, but if anybody has additional questions for Ebony, there's her contact information, and she may be on the call for a few additional minutes, so if you can, you can post it in the chat. We are going to take a short break at this time. It's going to be shorter than we originally decided, which usually happens. So if we can get you all to come back in 5 minutes, which will be 10:28. I know that's an odd time, but we're trying to catch up a little time if we can. We'll see you back here in 5 minutes, and then we'll hear from Gregg Anders and then also our industry panel. Thanks so much.
I'll stay available during the break if anyone wants to ask me a question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, Ebony. Louis Garcia.
Louis.
I had a question about one of your slides about the breakdown of specific trades, because you had carpenters separate from drywall. And when you are doing your research, are you identifying those individual buzzwords? Because like carpenters cover drywall, sound acoustics, floor tile guys. There's American River College, for example, has that does the carpenter apprenticeship. I believe has like 7 or 8, possibly more, different classifications in their apprenticeship structure. And then even the electrical workers, there's several different classifications within there as well. So I saw different titles in your slides popping up. How are you getting the numbers for what is a drywaller, what is a carpenter?
So, okay, so the community colleges have the ability to break that down into smaller subsets of data. Our occupational and industry data doesn't traditionally lend itself very well to that. So when it comes to like drywall installers and whatnot, they tend to be lumped in with carpenters because we don't have that breakdown for that group in particular. Did I answer your question?
Yes, in a manner.
Yeah.
Also with your the postings you were talking about for new jobs,
Mhm.
does that take into account the businesses that always just have continual postings? Some places just keep on renewing that they need people, even though they might not be hiring people.
So what it really shows is just if there was a new posting online, placed online in between those two date frames. It doesn't account for the recurring posting. So if a posting happened outside of that window, it's not necessarily counted as new. But if I were to roll in those other postings, the continual ones that you're talking about, we would see a boost in the numbers.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then you mentioned a deviation in solar, and there was another category you said that there's a little bit more to that.
Telecom.
So when you were the data showed that there was an increased demand for solar installers. Now, is that the
Yes.
people putting glass, or is that the roofers putting the framework, or is that the electricians making the connections?
So in my experience, the solar PV installers has more to do with like the roofing aspect. So like installing the panels on the roof. It's not so much the electricians. Electricians would be counted in other categories, such as like electricians themselves, or some of the construction traded occupations, or in the installation, maintenance, repair occupations.
So solar installers are not electrical workers; they're more on the roofing side of it. Then,
Yeah,
is there a
especially.
dividing line there?
Yeah, because when I get more into the job postings data around those workers, they're more along they're more along the lines of the roofing kind of things. And I can share some typical job postings that I've seen with those.
I see we're out of time. I got a couple other questions, but I can email you later on.
Yeah, just shoot me an email.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for asking the questions, and Ebony for staying on through the break. Appreciate it. We are going to get started again. I want to introduce to you Gregg Ander. He's the Managing Director of Gregg Ander LLC and Senior Fellow at Guidehouse Consulting, providing consultative services on a variety of power and energy sector issues. He was formerly the Vice President of Power Strategies at the Energy Foundation in San Francisco, where he oversaw a portfolio of investments, including utility generation, distributed energy resources, energy efficiency, and cross-cutting business models. Previously, he held numerous senior management positions during his 30-year career at Southern California Edison. Mr. Ander was the executive producer of 7 environmentally focused television programs for NBC, CBS, and PBS. In addition, Mr. Ander serves on the board of directors for the Sustainable Building Industry Council and the New Building Institute, and he has authored over 70 energy and environmental related articles, including winning various awards for those and several other projects. So Gregg Ander, I'm going to hand it off to you at this point. Gregg?
Yes, thanks, Renee. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And Jesse, you're going to drive this as you did with Ebony. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I appreciate it. We've worked together previously. I was asked to talk a bit about some of the policy drivers. I think fundamentally to this conversation is that policies drive markets and create opportunities. And I'll walk you through some of the ones that I'm seeing in the landscape, both at the federal down to the local level, that directly affect or soon will affect the ECU market segments. Next slide. So things like environmental protection, climate change, social justice, when policies are built around that, they will and should affect markets. When these are initiated or operationalized, outcomes are game changing. This is a transformative issues going on throughout our economy. And with anything that's transformative like this, there will be winners and there will be losers. Some people will be out of the game. Next slide. So I mentioned policies create markets, and these can be at the federal level, state, local government, even air quality districts, local government, city and county. That can be in terms of legislative actions, regulations like building codes, executive orders from presidents, governors, even mayors. Many local governments have climate action plans, and certainly those of us in the building industry deal with codes and standards and various local ordinances all the time. These are all various types and forms of policy drivers. Next slide. And I'll talk about all these very briefly. I wanted to start on the federal side. Rob mentioned some of these earlier, but there's a lot of discussion about a comprehensive infrastructure bill or set of bills. And while these are traditionally roads, bridges, water, infrastructure, seismic upgrades, levee rebuilding, things like that, the president and the recently appointed Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, have talked about significant investments or interweaving some of the climate change and environmental protection opportunities within that infrastructure bill. An example is both the president and the Secretary of Transportation talked about adding approximately 500,000 chargers for electric vehicles powered by renewables. So that's an example of how, you know, environmental protection will be interwoven into infrastructure bills going forward. And these are all in the works as we speak. Next slide. Staying on the federal side, I'm going to mention something that most of you may not have heard of, but it's a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. FERC commissioners are appointed by the president, and their job is to provide regulation and guidance for the energy system, the transmission system. So it's the bulk system. It's principally for reliability and resiliency and economy in terms of what they do. But they kicked out something called FERC Order 2222 within the last 8 weeks or so, 8 or 10 weeks. And it essentially allows distributed energy resources to support and participate in the transmission system. So the transmission system is the high voltage, it's the bulk system in California. Our bulk system is managed by the California Independent System Operator up in Folsom. And we're interconnected with the Northwest, with Nevada and Arizona. You may have been reading what's going on in Texas, that's run by an organization called ERCOT. They are isolated. They're not interconnected with other states, other power pools, and that's one of the reasons they're having a lot of issues right now, but California is, and FERC helps regulate that. The reason this is important because distributed energy resources are things like battery storage, renewable solar, even potentially vehicles, electric vehicles in aggregate. On the bottom left, those are some storage units being set in place, and obviously some renewables on the right side there. But these distributed energy resources can support the grid, and they're distributed, so they're not coming from a centralized system like a combined cycle power plant or coal, anything like that. So they're distributed, so they have benefits that way as well, where you can put them close to where the need is. Next slide. And that's important because it helps scale things. If it's allowed, that means it's encouraged, and we'll see more of it. And if you have more of it, typically it'll help prices become more competitive and drop, and see yet more installed throughout the country and in California. I want to drop down on the state level and there's a number here, and there are literally dozens here. I'm going to go through maybe 10, but there are many, many, many more that I won't mention, but these are the ones that are directly related to ECU in particular. Senate Bill 100 that was authored by Kevin De Leon, it, among other things, talks about 100% renewable portfolio standard. We're well underway achieving these. We're currently at about 40% as of about 6 weeks ago, which is great. There are issues, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but even at 40%, and again, we're heading to 100% renewable generation to meet our loads, we are over generating nearly every day right now at 40%. So while this is a problem, really you should think about it as an opportunity. Things like storage and other control and advanced automation opportunities to help manage this. Senate Bill 49 is by Senator Skinner, Nancy Skinner from the Bay Area. Senate Bill 49, among other things, talks about requiring a state agency to develop regulations for building assets. These are assets behind the meter to facilitate flexible loads. So let me say that in plain English. So this would be things like chillers, air handlers, variable speed drives on motors and drives, different assets in the buildings that are able to be flexible. Why? As I said, we're over generating now. And so where we're heading, going towards Ebony's point about advanced automation and artificial intelligence, there are right now times where you will send signals to people real time. So it's called dynamic pricing or real-time pricing, where you're over generating, and rather than doing nothing with it, you can send a signal saying, look, instead of 20 cent kilowatt hours, they're a nickel. So charge your thermal storage system. If you have a fleet of electric vehicles, fire them up, anything you can do. My sense is once these price signals are in place, the industry and the market will come up with all sorts of creative ways to use these flexible price signals. It will lead to much smarter buildings, much higher IQ buildings, advanced automation, artificial intelligence, cloud-based machine learning. So it's more complicated, but it ultimately yields much higher efficacy in the whole building, transportation, power sectors. Next slide. Continuing on sort of state activities, I want to talk about a couple executive orders. EO Executive Order B4818, this was signed by Governor Brown before he left, signed an executive order, among other things, talking about his desire to have 5 million electric vehicles by 2030. That's a big jump. And what EOs do, executive orders do, is send signals to various government agencies, Department General Services, universities, CSUs, et cetera, on this is the direction we're heading. So think about it as you're doing your budgeting and CapEx work. As a result of that executive order, Assemblyperson Ting authored AB 2127. These numbers aren't important unless you want to look them up, but I'll give them to you. And since that executive order came out from the governor, he said, okay, interesting, but what are the impacts to our infrastructure, to the grid? If we have all these electric vehicles, how do you charge them? How do you maintain them? It's a long report. A number of agencies were involved in it, the Energy Commission and others. In a snapshot, the upshot is for those 5 million vehicles, we need about 1.5 million chargers. So that charging infrastructure needs to amp up very significantly throughout the state. After that, Governor Newsom came out with Executive Order N7920, which basically says by 2035, all new vehicles and light duty trucks need to be zero emission vehicles. Let me say it a different way. Internal combustion engines, there's a lot of acronyms we live in, they're referred to as ICE, ICE, internal combustion engines. There will be exemptions, but won't be allowed for sale in California. So they all need to be zero emissions, or ZEV, by 2035. That's a pretty significant executive order that a lot of people are looking at and figuring out how to operationalize. Next slide. So we can see that a number of these policies are very aggressive. They're clearly designed for environmental benefits, social justice, climate change, and I want to keep those all rolled in together. But it essentially will advance and accelerate decarbonization of these three big markets: buildings, which account for roughly 30% of emissions; transportation, which is approximately 40%; and the power sector, which is another 30%. And what's kind of a common thread around here is electrification. So you see internal combustion engines going to zero emission vehicles or electric vehicles. You see electrification of the building sector and all kinds of changes within the power sector in terms of generation and distribution, transmission, and operation. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the renewable piece of this just real quickly. I know this image is really small for you, but the upper left one, we talked about the 100% renewable portfolio. So a lot of that is wind or photovoltaic PV. The upper left one is the output of a wind farm in the The bottom axis is time in hours, and it's power or megawatts on the vertical. And it's for a month. I believe it's April. And so there's one curve for each day of the month. So there's roughly 30 curves on there. And you can see it looks like spaghetti. And that's my point. If you integrate all those lines, it's the blue line in the middle. So it's an average of about 250 megawatts of production. But real time, it's as high as 600 and as low as nothing. And so if you're a grid operator, that's the challenge, or I'm going to put this as an opportunity. As we integrate more and more renewables, is to figure out ways to sort of level that off and make it as reliable as possible. The one on the right is the output for a rooftop photovoltaic system. It's on a big box retail. And once again, on the vertical axis, we're looking at power output in kilowatts, in time, T time, in seconds on the bottom. And once again, you can see it in the morning, it fires up a little bit. There's some cloud cover, it drops off mid-morning. It reaches its peak around solar noon and then sort of drops off, and at sunset, it drops off to zero. So again, we have this intermittency issue, which is a challenge for grid operators. And when we're integrating, whether it's PV or wind, this all needs to be taken into account so we have a safe, reliable, and resilient system here, which are creating opportunities. Think of it as opportunities. Next slide. As a grid operator, this is for California. You probably have seen or heard about this or read about it. This is the duck curve. And if you look at it, it sort of looks like in silhouette a duck with the sort of tail on the left and the head on the right and the belly in the middle. And we use this duck curve to kind of graphically show what's happening. The blue line in the middle is the actual load of what the grid needs to provide in terms of generation. And as you add more and more renewables to the system, that's why the belly you see getting bigger and bigger, dropping down. And that's overgeneration. That's graphically showing the overgeneration. And what's significant about this is that, obviously when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, you're not getting resources from those assets. Later in the day, where you can see around 6 p.m., there's a real steep curve that goes up the neck of the duck. They call that ramping. And so from late afternoon till, when we all get home and throw in something in the, 2000 watt microwave or plug in our electric vehicles, there's a 13,000 megawatt ramp need that needs to come online in 3 hours. Again, that's very significant. If you look at a nuclear power plant, it's roughly 2,000 megawatts. So that's almost 7 nuke plants need to ramp up to meet that load. Again, this is where distributed resources are important and useful. Not all coming from central large plants that they'll be distributed amongst the grid in and around the Central Valley and the Bay Area and Southern California and so forth. So these are all things that need to happen, and these are policy drivers that create markets. Next slide. So I just wanted to share. I'm moving very fast here, Renee, so I'm going to make up a little time for you here. So sorry for the motor mouth. But I wanted to share some data points here. Rob alluded to this, but California is a large market. It's the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, larger than many countries around the world, which gives it some market pull. When I go to workshops and hearings and regulatory proceedings, we routinely see people from Carrier and General Motors and people from all around the country to being involved what's happening here, because what happens here often goes to other leading edge markets as well. The world's largest photovoltaic system is here in California. It's 17 megawatts. It's the Apple facility in Cupertino in Silicon Valley. That's the middle image down below. It's a huge photovoltaic system and a big building, big campus. I do a lot of work in other states too. And in California, we were installing 13,000 photovoltaic systems behind the meter, BTM, behind the meter, per month, which is a big number. That's pre-COVID, so it dropped off a little bit, but it's very significant. And when I'm working in other countries or other states, they're blown away by that number. The next one has to do with electrification of transportation. So in the US, there's a little over 1.7 million vehicles in the US. There's about, as of January last month, there's about 800,000 EVs in California. So about half of all electric vehicles are in our state. General Motors is a large automobile company headquartered in Detroit. I've been at their headquarters. They were part of a lawsuit with the Trump administration and Toyota and others against the state of California and the Air Resources Board, suing California for trying to regulate tailpipe emissions. After November 4th, GM and others broke away from that and dropped out of that litigation. And last month in January, they came out, their CEO, the story broke in the New York Times, and the next day was the front page of the Wall Street Journal, that General Motors will have all zero emission vehicles by 2035. And as a company, including their supply chain, be carbon neutral by 2040. This is a huge about face from where they were 6 months ago, where they were suing California. So I just want to throw that out there, that they've made some changes and they're going all out, making huge investments. In California, local governments, 41 local governments have adopted electrification REACH codes. So this is different and a higher standard than, say, Title 24, which is the state energy code. And 60 local governments are in the process of adding them as well. So it'll be over 100. They tend to be in more Northern California than Southern California right now, if you look at a scatter plot on the state. And what that means is that the local governments are going beyond the state codes and Unified Building Code and National Electrical Code, requiring all electric equipment, larger panel capacity, limiting gas line extensions, things like that. It's climate change related, and it's dealing with electrification. Another related data point is about 56% of California gas pipelines are 50 years old or older. That comes from the Building Decarbonization Coalition as a data point. Why is that important? Well, it's a huge investment. And if there are significant policies in place to decarbonize, buildings, transportation, power sectors, what do you do with those pipelines? Do you invest in upgrading them since they're towards the end of their useful life? Do you use that money for the electrification policies? What are the safety implications, et cetera? So these are very active discussions that are going on real time about what we do with some of these assets going forward, knowing where we are now and where we want to be in 5 and 10 years. Very significant. The last one I'll leave you with crosses all sectors, and this comes from an officer from Verizon. He's a vice president there, Sean Harrington. He was talking about, so they're involved in putting fiber in various cities and in getting the infrastructure in place for autonomous vehicles and smart cities. And through his analysis and the work they're doing, essentially that the data produced in the next 18 months, the next year and a half that's produced will exceed all the data that's been produced in the history of mankind. So this goes towards cloud computing, cloud-based machine learning, advanced automation, our smart vehicles, much higher intelligent buildings going online. So this gives you a sense of, sort of what's happening in the industry and where we're heading. Next slide. So it ties together because we should think of smart buildings as assets, not just loads, with advanced automation and much higher intelligence than what we've seen historically with pneumatic control systems. This is DDC, this is artificial intelligence. There needs to be supervisory controls that are able to talk with proprietary automation for renewable systems, for electric vehicle infrastructure. All the various proprietary systems need to work synergistically. But as well, it needs to roll up into smarter cities, smarter grids, and all these large sectors need to work together. And we should think of it that way more holistically. Next slide. Going forward, my sense is that we'll continue to see environmental protection, social equity, and climate be drivers in regulatory proceedings and encouraging investments for resiliency and security. I'm including offshore wind here too. Right now, California has no offshore wind. There's a little bit on the East Coast off of Cape Cod and a lot in the European Union in the Baltic Sea supplying for Denmark, Germany, Sweden, and we are behind the 8 ball here. We have a head of the California Energy Commission, Commissioner Hochschild, who's very bullish on offshore wind, and the sort of the regulatory and political climate is bullish on this as well. So my sense is you're going to see, starting with pilots and proof of concept, more offshore wind opportunities pop up. Those are likely to be high-paying jobs for the design, construction, maintenance, operation. The other benefit of offshore wind is that the generation profile will help that duck curve because there's more wind throughout the evenings and can help flatten that curve, which is a good thing. And then my sense is that you may hear about this on the next panel, but the utilities will be encouraged and be investing significantly in resiliency and stiffening the grid and more microgrids, more distributed resources, less centralized generation, and that all needs to be tied together with things like advanced automation. Next slide. Yeah, okay, that's where we ended up. So that's kind of a quick snapshot, and Renee, back to you.
Thanks so much, Greg. I want to just encourage you, Greg, there's 2 questions for you in the chat. If I could have you answer them there, because we need to move forward with the agenda. There's a question from Louis Garcia and Yvonne Harris. Great questions that I think if you can reply in the chat, then people can see that information. And I'm going to hand it over now to James Morante, the statewide director of energy construction and utilities. I believe he's going to introduce quickly this workforce video from the community colleges, and then we'll go to the industry panel.
Well, thanks, Renee. Appreciate the time and great panels earlier. We're so rich of information that, but before we jump into the industry panel, I wanted to pivot to the people, and I wanted to talk a bit about equity. Equity, diversity in the workplace is front and center in all of our reports and in surveys, and just necessity. And as you heard from Dr. Eyler and Ebony, both of their presentations, right? We have an opportunity and we have a challenge. As you heard from Dr. Eyler, right? We have a lot of those facets of our sector that are growing with high demand that requires us to broaden that pipeline of interested candidates, skilled candidates, and going beyond the traditional means of sourcing interested individuals to get into our sector. Secondarily, through Ebony's presentation, you also saw that the ECU sector in general, we've had some barriers in terms of the diversity in our workplace, in our workforce. And so we've got to be much more intentional. And ECU sector has been intentionally targeting ways to operationalize diversity in the workplace. And it's really not a priority at this point. Priorities change. And what I want to reinforce is that it needs to be a value. Values remain consistent. And if we're going to tackle equity and diversity, it needs to be a common thread. So when we as a sector are engaging on new projects and initiatives, equity is front and center. And I wanted this video to sort of be symbolic of that. I'll have a couple comments afterward. I'm going to cross my fingers that the video audio works. So I'll hand it over to Jesse to show the video, and I have a couple comments afterward.
Yeah, let me know if the audio is muffly, but start playing it.
I'm 32 years old. I'm from Compton, California.
Good.
My name is Jenna Durrell. I never thought I would be a carpenter. Working on a big project like I am, it's really opened a lot of doors for me. Right now, we're working on the air shaft for the underground metro station. Before that, we were working on building farms to expand the tunnel. Start your career in construction. You go to a community college, they offer classes. Everything you need doesn't cost anything. Determination, motivation, getting up early, just feeling like you want to get more out of life and do more. When I first started, it was kind of challenging being a woman, an apprentice, and Black as well, because there's not a lot of Black women out there. But everybody accepts me, I accept them. I would definitely recommend other women to do as far as working in construction, and they take great care of you. Benefits, health care. I'm looking forward to having my first child, and I don't have to worry about him being sick. I'm able to take extra care of him. This whole process has not only changed me like mentally, but physically and spiritually as well. So I'm just a completely different person now. I'm looking towards a new future. My name is Jenna Durrell, and I am a carpenter.
Thanks, Jesse, for showing that. I'm glad we had the opportunity to show that. That really brings to life and puts a face on what we're talking about. And the messaging, the imagery, and the video itself. You notice it was targeting in Los Angeles, and we showed the Los Angeles region community colleges that have ECU programs. You know, if we're going to make a dent in this, it needs to be a very specific and targeted and intentional strategies. And so that was targeting women in trades in the African-American community in Los Angeles. And so as we move forward and we think about strategies of how we tackle diversity, you know, it needs to be regionally based, program based, and population based, because the one size fits all is not going to work. A lot of my presentations always start with, you know, if you build it, they will come, maybe, because we've got some work to do on the backside to really engage these communities to understand what a career in ECU looks like. So we've got to get to the root cause of the barriers, the experiences, and the optics of each of these populations, reverse engineer the marketing so that we can really resonate with them in terms of connecting to them and making this an attractive endeavor for training and career opportunities. So we have other collateral materials. So if you're interested, you know, the ECUsector.com is where we house a lot of our resource material. I believe Renee posted the video link in the chat box. There's other videos we've created, including one up in Butte County for the literal and figurative reconstruction. It's bilingual, it's in Spanish and English to target the Latin community up in Butte for their construction and HVAC programs up there. So proud of the work we're doing. Certainly reach out to me if you have any questions or want to have a discussion about this. So with that, thank you for the time, Renee. We're going to transition quickly into the industry panel. I believe I saw everybody is on board and active. So if I can ask the participants, take yourselves off mute and we'll jump right in. I'm happy to have, and everyone who's seen the agenda has seen that we've got 4 great panelists who are lined up. And so rather than me doing these introductions, I want to bundle this into a question, and I'll sort of moderate and point at who's going when. But introduce yourself, your organization, your business, your role, and really in terms of the number of employees, how you recruit them, in terms of backdrop to the company and the organization that you're representing. So let's start first with Tony CR with Tesla.
Thanks, James. Hi, Tony Shara with Tesla. I work within our workforce development and educations programs. Specifically, I oversee all recruiting for our START program, which is a academy-like program that we work with a lot of community colleges. Currently have 2 of those programs in the state of California, specifically on the field service organization side. With that, we hire, we're over 20,000 employees in the state of California alone. So, and we're constantly hiring. I think one of our big metrics nationwide is we're looking at probably close to 10,000 installers across the country for solar roof and PV installation, just to be, very tie into this conversation. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Great, thank you so much. Susan.
Hi, good to see you, James. Hi, I'm Susan Wheeler, and I manage workforce development for SMUD. I also support the California Mobility Center as we ramp up our efforts to develop a clean mobility ecosystem in the Sacramento region. SMUD's the 6th largest community-owned electric utility in the US, and for over 70 years, we've provided complete, reliable energy solutions at affordable rates to our community. SMUD's 2,300 employees are recruited through social media, outreach to our education partners, partnering with our community-based organizations, and networking. One of my favorite stories is when I attended a networking event of a women in technology organization. And, when you say you work for SMUD, a lot of people want to come talk to you. And one of the women who approached me, I was able to make introductions, and she had to go through a competitive process, but ended up getting hired at SMUD. So kind of the power of networking, which is a little challenging during times of COVID, but it still happens.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thanks for joining. Ralph.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to join this wonderful seminar that we've had so far. Soliva Energy is a small energy technology development company. We're located in the heart of Silicon Valley. We're working on Solar 2.0, trying to maximize the amount of energy harvest per square foot. And we've been in business for about 10 years, employ around 40 to 50 people. We're doing construction projects. We're developing new technology, in particular in new battery technology that we're working on and hope to bring to the market pretty soon. Specialize also in solar thermal and combined heat and power solar modules. We also have some initiatives around the globe developing new solar water purification technology and solar desalination. So we're really a technology company looking to take advantage of the latest technology and developing the next generation of products.
Great, thank you, Ralph. And Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Penicetti. I work with Lennar Homes. I'm the Vice President of Operations there at a corporate level. We have 38 divisions across the United States. We employ over 12,000 associates. We are going to build north of 60,000 homes this year across the country. As far as ways that we recruit, any and all ways, social media, still resumes and mail, and we try everything. Recruiting at schools. We do it not only at the division level, but we also have at regional levels where we do recruiting. As far as workforce development, one of the things that we've done here that's been unique in Northern California here in Sacramento is the Sacramento Home Building Division, along with their trade partners, the North State BIA. We created a program 5 years ago to where we do after-school workshops where we go into the schools, teach the kids how to use construction tools. We've sponsored an internship in the summertime, and then we also do a senior job hire, to where we've put many of the kids graduating from high school to work right into the construction industry. So in the last 5 years, this program's we've introduced the construction to probably over 1,000 students here at the local high schools.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. So as we get into these questions, we'll go in the same order that's on the screen. That'll just keep it, everyone can anticipate when they're speaking. And for participants on the webinar, you'll see that we were deliberate in being inclusive of all facets of ECU, right? Energy, construction, and utilities. So we've been deliberate so we can get the optics and perspectives and experiences from in response to these questions by all facets of our sector to provide some diversity and thought here. So the first question, we'll jump into it. So what foundational and/or technical skills are necessary for your respective organizations for particularly entry-level positions in your companies? So Tony, we'll start with you.
Okay, yeah, there's the myriad of entry-level positions we have at Tesla. When looking at, let's say, the ECU sector, I think on the installer role, it's just maybe some exposure to it, and also the willingness and attitude to wanting to work on a roof 20 feet above the air on it with a 20 degree pitch, right, and doing it safely. Most of our factories, production associate, the entry level production associate, really is comes down to attitude and willingness to want to work, be a part of something that's greater than themselves. From the service side of things, you do definitely have to have some sort of technical know-how in regards to automotive, specifically fundamental electrical. Electrical is the core for a lot of our functions, and I'm not talking like software coding. I'm talking like Ohm's law, things that are very already ingrained in a lot of curriculum. So those are the things that we really look for across the three major verticals within our company. So
Great, thank you. Before we go to Susan, everyone's been pretty good at this. So as if questions pop up, we did reserve some time at the back end of the panel for questions, either to the group and or individuals. So just go ahead and keep doing that, and then Jesse and I will monitor those, and we'll crank through those at the end with the time we have remaining. So keep that up. Susan.
That's always usually an interesting question, because I know our education partners are looking for specific classes that they need to teach. And I would say just, it's important to kind of think broadly rather than specific types of courses or skills. So I would say really the majority of the jobs at SMUD don't require college degrees. We're really looking for people with some foundational skills and who embrace the values that we embrace at SMUD, who can demonstrate leadership and ingenuity, community and integrity. So that's really important. And we're looking for people who can demonstrate teamwork and support a safety culture. In the electric utility industry, safety is, as you know, James, is paramount, as is teamwork. We invest in technology, in analytics and infrastructure to support the evolving utility business. So technical skills that we're focusing on in terms of recruiting. So some of the areas that are kind of hard to recruit or up and coming really include data analytics, as Ebony mentioned, AI and cybersecurity. So those are really key technical areas that we're looking for. And our entry-level positions really span the gamut from communications and marketing to customer service, finance, engineering, and our skilled trades. So we really have, I usually say when we go to recruiting events, we have every job out there that anybody could ever want, except for maybe the entertainment industry, except we do have some very entertaining employees.
Well, Susan, that's usually government relations is the entertainment role at a utility. So, all right, moving on, Ralph.
I would say for the skill set that we're looking for, skill sets are typical of the construction industry. Our construction teams do everything from large scale carport installations to ground mount installations to rooftop to some unique structures that we've built for solar operations. But the more important one that we see coming forward, if you look at where everything that we learned in the last presentation, we're looking for people that are, in some cases, engineers that are wild-eyed dreamers that have the ability to take a look at a problem and create a new solution for it. So Solar 2.0, attacking that deck curve. We have a lot of guys devoted to storage engineering and controls engineering, and how to maximize the amount of that energy generated in the duct curve and spread it out over a useful time, 24 hours a day, so it's more available. We're very critically aware of what's happened in Texas, and we're working in some of our areas to try and I want to say, reduce the risk of electrical failure that Texas nearly experienced over the last couple of days. So a lot of our technology development is focused on electrical, even chemical engineering, electrical engineering, power engineering, chemical engineering, and mechanical structural engineering as we develop our products. So in a way, our engineering is almost taking the full amount of our technology development. But in terms of installation, we find our crews have to work very closely with our engineering staff to make sure that these products that are being developed are going to be done in a fashion that are easy to install, easy to operate, easy to control, and easy to deploy in our environment, in the business. So those construction, what I call the hyper construction technicians that we have are really a combination of electrical, mechanical, and civil on the construction side that have to be able to think safety first and use their critical thinking skills to solve problems that the engineers may not have anticipated. And so we use that in our learning curves to develop these new products and programs that we're going to be offering in the next year and a half to 2 years.
Great, thank you. Before we move to Jeff, I think Susan had one additional idea to
Sorry about
provide.
that.
So
I have to remember that I have two hats. So I'm also representing the California Mobility Center. And just wanted to point out that the opportunities at the California Mobility Center will span advanced manufacturing production jobs to really specialized technical and engineering opportunities. So as I mentioned, California Mobility Center is a relatively new concept in our region. We're just starting to build the ecosystem and infrastructure, but I don't want to forget that those are opportunities for our community as well. So thank you, James.
thank you, Susan. We'll move to Jeff.
Okay, so at Lennar, I mean, we're basically construction managers, meaning that we subcontract out basically the building of the home. We manage the home. So we have roughly 2,800 construction managers that are out in the field that actually manage the work to be done. So when you look at that skill set, you look at what type of technical skills do they need? They need problem-solving skills, decision-making, communication, because that's what they do, mathematics, because you can't do anything in construction without mathematics, collaboration, and technical writing, right? We write a lot of things, and one of the things that we become very weak at is how we put information down and pass that along. Of course, we have, any technical training is a benefit, so whether that's in design, carpentry, building codes, materials, and safety, because we do all of those things, right? We have to manage all of those things on the job site. A lot of the home building we can teach. A lot of our construction managers do not go to a four-year university. Most of them come up through the trades. Because they're able to communicate and speak to the trade. And we find that very beneficial. And where we struggle actually is for somebody who has gone through, say, a four-year university and then comes out to the field, comes to work for Lennar and has not worked, say, in the field. The biggest thing they struggle with is actually in their communication, basically inspiring, motivating, and leading those people that are in the field. And so you see kind of a very different. So a lot of the divisions will stay probably, 60% to 70% of their people, they will actually look through the trades to come out of there to come into management. But again, that which makes those skills of decision-making, mathematics even more critical.
Great. Thank you for that insight. That's great information. I'm going to combine the next two questions in the spirit of time, because I think they dovetail well together. So what new technology and/or equipment are you launching at your companies and that community colleges could consider incorporating into their courses? And at the same time, what skills and/or equipment are becoming obsolete in terms of technology, equipment, regulations, laws, and et cetera? We'll start with you, Tony.
Well, I think from this product perspective, it would definitely be our solar roof, which is an actual roofing system or roof material that is got a photovoltaic cell built into it, and is you would replace your roof. That's probably one of the newer products that we've had and are not necessarily trained or outside of Tesla. Aside from that, our Powerwall, which is a residential storage, battery storage system. And then the other thing would probably be we've got a new inverter that we've brought to the market. The skills needed for that are, again, like what everyone else is pretty, there really isn't any new skill needed for it. It's just addressing it's a new product, right? So having some technical ability and again, fundamental electrical, hands down is always going to be a core tenet of a lot of our roles. Understanding how to read a meter, how what not to touch, what to touch. I think, to be honest with you, the ability to safely do things and consistently do that. Time and time again, we see other people out there on roofs not tied in, not taking the necessary precautions to do some of these things safely. But from a technology perspective, our solar roof is probably like the newest thing that we've brought into the market. And again, we're using our same installation teams who are doing a lot of the PV panel installation. We're just training them a little bit differently on the product. Again, there's no secret sauce there's not a lot of secret sauce to Tesla. It's just coming to us with the ability and know-how, and being willing to like really work hard, because it is a true meritocracy. And it's one of the, I've worked at a couple different companies, and I feel like this is a very, very true to its statement. The harder you work, the better you do. It's pretty straightforward. And that's really tough to teach, right? And that's really a tough skill to pass along. So I just keep hammering that home.
And the second half of the question, going back to, so in the last couple of years, is there equipment or skills that you are finding that are less or obsolete as we transition to these new technologies?
Not to my knowledge. Like I said, like we're very rooted in very historically, found fundamentals. From a technology, from like a tools perspective. Obviously, today's technicians and installers have to have some sort of ability to like maybe send an email or have some, some computer skills of that nature. But electricity is electricity. It's very similar to the toilet. Really, the design hasn't changed in over 100 years. So the thing that I would continue to hammer home is stop trying to like be a part of the future and continue to, teach the past. I know that sounds funny coming from a company that's extremely progressive, but time and time again, I interview students who can't physically grasp or show that they know these electrical fundamentals, right? They can't. And so, like Jeff talking about going from, looking internally and people who've been in the trades, it's actually easier to hire someone to be a leader in your company who is doing the work and showing how they can do that work and it's applying it. So I really do, like I said, the thing that I look for the most is the fundamentals. There's, again, in this industry, there's not a lot that's changing other than maybe methodologies and regulations, and we'll obviously adhere to those on the fly, but again, it comes down to some intangibles that we're not, we have a hard time trying to get trained in at the community college level, and trying to work at that, and just being able to show that the stuff, that and it's not a lot. That's not a lot for us to ask.
Great, thank you, Tony. Susan, we'll move to you.
So as we expand our reliable energy offerings at SMUD, things like cyber protection, secure wireless communications, battery storage, alternative renewable technologies, clean mobility, energy efficiency, low carbon, and low carbon or carbon neutral technologies, greenhouse gas reduction, environmentally progressive technologies. Those are all really important areas that we'll continue to focus on, and they're becoming even more important. In terms of kind of skills that become obsolete, I just want to refer back to something that Ebony said, which is it's important for companies to invest in upskilling and reskilling its workforce. And an example that I have is I've been at SMUD about 10 years, and before I came on board, SMUD made the decision to switch from manual meter reading to smart meters. And they partnered with the unions and their workforce and provided reskill training to help the hundreds of SMUD meter readers make the transition into new careers. So we fully embrace kind of the need to reskill and upskill. And we're looking to help prepare our workforce for the jobs of the future. As we move to automate more and streamline more of our operations, we're employing more SCADA controls, so that's the supervisor control and data acquisition technology. And we continue to gather and use real-time data. In fact, for the most part, we're inundated with data. So I think the important skill is, if you're going to make that transition, if your job is going to be automated, you need to understand what you're working in that job, so you understand the information, you understand the data. The next part is to be able to analyze that data and be able to tell a story with the data. So I would say, any of the jobs that we might have, that if they end up being automated, there's always information behind that the people have done the jobs, that they're in the best positioned to understand what those jobs actually entail and what information might be useful to be able to streamline processes in the future. So, and, you know, as I said before, because technology changes constantly, to come up with a list of, you know, here's the technologies we want you to, you know, we want our education partners to focus on in the future. I think it's more important to have, as Tony said, to have individuals that are motivated, that are willing to learn new things, new ways of doing things, new technologies. So that's more important than having them come in to us with a specific technology. Obviously, there are certain areas that you need to have a technical background. You know, SMUD uses SAP, for example. So, you know, we wouldn't say, you know, well, if you don't have SAP, you can start in you know, doing SAP, but you know, but for the most part, I think just having that basic desire to learn is really important.
Thank you. Ralph.
A real quick rundown on our product set that's in development. We're working on PV thermal systems alongside of our standard PV module technology. We have specialized in heat transfer and performance improvement of photovoltaic technologies by cooling them and getting more energy out. Our product offerings also include battery systems, and where we choose to put battery systems. I think one of the big problems coming up on the horizon, houses are getting smaller in footprint and growing taller, which limits the amount of available roof space. The other thing that's happening in the market space is, I think alluded to in one of the earlier presentations, we want to go to a zero carbon footprint environment where we're not burning fossil fuels, which means water heaters in homes, traditional gas water heaters in homes are going away. So the energy footprint of the home is being driven toward electrical. That's not always possible to sustain with the amount of available roof space on homes. So a combined PV thermal panel is something that we've got in development. We've been working on that for the past several years. Its first pass is coming out of the regulatory approval. We hope to have that in the market. And we're working on also where you put your storage batteries for your home and how you do safe battery chemistry to keep people safe in the event that there's a problem with the battery systems. We're also working on water recovery, so it's kind of governing the approach that we take to the market. And so in terms of skilled trades that we need from an engineering perspective, we're always looking for good power engineers, good electronics engineers, good chemical engineers, battery engineers when you can find one. I happen to be one, so it makes it a little bit easier, but in the long run, as you grow a business, getting the skilled resources that you need from a technical perspective is always tough. But even more tough is the future employee that we have performing installations out in the field. So skilled electricians that are skilled in power, hooking up large scale power systems, design engineers that are familiar with high power and utility scale operations are hard to find. But we do a lot of our own specific custom training where we can't find those skill sets. We develop them internally. And one of the great strengths of our company, I think, is that we recruit heavily in the minority groups to be able to bring in the diversity in skill sets, both in trades and in engineering, simply because it gives us a better approach to problem solving that we have. I heard the word or saw the word SCADA. We're doing a lot of work in automation and control of homes. And we're trying to solve other issues related to getting homes ready for renewable energy because it presents a problem. If your home is not energy efficient, you're just simply wasting your precious resource dollars putting it into something that's not going to give you a good return on your investment. We fully embrace the change in California laws. We're happy to hear it. I scratch my head sometimes because I'm wondering about how we're going to feed all the electrical vehicles and the grid capacity to do that. So maybe that'll help solve the duck curve problem. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at. And we encourage actually some outreach to high schools where we can afford the time to try and encourage the high school students to go into programs that lead to the type of skill sets that we're looking for. So it's
Great.
a tough challenge.
Thanks, Ralph. Jeff.
Well, I'll just kind of add to what the others have said. What is actually becoming obsolete in the construction industry is actually our skilled workers. Right, we're losing a very talented force. And there was a question earlier, I think after Ebony's presentation, about, well, what is the solar technician? Is that the electrician? Is that the person who sets the panels? You know, is that the person that pulls the wire down to the box? Is it the roofer? One of the problems with our industry is, right, we take and we section up all these jobs. And the reason we section them all up is they become easier to teach if I don't teach them the full job. And we're doing ourselves a big disservice to that, because we're not teaching somebody how to do the whole job. And therefore, we are limiting the amount of money that person can make, right? Their quality of life, because they're not as skilled. And so that's really a problem for our industry. Again, as a home building industry, we have not changed much. As Tony has said, I mean, look, it's screwdrivers and hammers and power tools, right? And what we find is that we just need to teach that skill, because that's the basis of which we build off of. And from that, you know, we learn other things. So, you know, high tech from a standpoint, home building isn't high tech. I mean, we build outside, we're in weather, we figure out, you know, again, how to construct the building. Now, do we have things that we have to do? Sure. We have, as a company, do we have estimating software? Yes. Do we have scheduling software? Yes. Do they have to do, as managers, presentations? Yes. Do they have to write technical reports? Yes. So they got to do those types of things. Sometimes that technical report can be an email. And how do I put the information in an email to move information to somebody else to get the right answer so I keep the job moving? You know, how do I understand the problem that I have and I solve that problem and able to get that out to 6 or 7 other people that it takes to be able to put it together correctly? So those are the types of things that we run into. You know, as far as technology wise, what is changing? You all are speaking about it. You're changing my home. You're changing how my home functions and what my home does. It no longer just keeps the rain off your head. It generates power. And now we interconnect all these products that are inside of the home, and we try to, you know, have, I guess, our person kind of help our customer understand how all these things are interconnected and how they can use their smartphone to turn on their lights, you know, turn on their air conditioning, turn up their spa, you know, heat, do whatever it is they want to do. And that's a challenge for a lot of our owners of the homes. Younger customers, not so much of a problem. Older customers here in Sacramento, we probably have 9 communities that we do for the 55 and older. And so that's a whole different challenge when it comes to changing their home on them and how they use that and how they use that technology. So that's really the technology change, is how our structure is changing and how that affects our customer.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Before we move to the next question, I think we've hit on a few unique dynamics of ECU, particularly when you're comparing us to some of the other sector work that for my peers, such as biotech and health and information technology and the like. I think we've heard, and the struggle that we have is that we're really at a crossroads where we've heard, right, the occupations are the same for the most part. There's still HVAC, it's still plumbing, it's still construction managers. The skill sets are different and they're evolving. And sometimes, you know, we spend a lot of time looking forward. If you look at Gregg Andrews' presentation, right, there's a lot of opportunities moving forward in terms of policy drivers and creating markets. But at the same time, we've got high demand needs today. So how much time do we spend on the jobs that are posted today for short-term certificates to get people employed, as opposed to preparing for the future needs that we quite haven't yet nailed down what they are yet, but we don't want to get behind the 8 ball. And so that's a struggle. We have limited time and resources of where we look forward to today or tomorrow. And at the same time, going back to equity a little bit, the other crosshair is that, you know, when it comes to short-term certificates, especially with ECU students tend to be an older demographic. I think at 26 years of age is the average student age. So we're not attracting necessarily the individual straight out of high school. They've got some life lessons under their belt. So time is of the essence. And as we start looking toward, you know, retention and completion, that's a different strategy in terms of resources and time than it is to attract and recruit out into the communities. We start talking about attracting new populations and diverse audiences who may not be necessarily as savvy in what is available. And so there's a lot of competing facets for our time that I don't want to say we're struggling with. It's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge because I'm not sure our sector is as progressive as some of the other sectors as it comes to transitioning real time. And so I just wanted to put that on the table because it is a struggle with all of us as we move forward on this. So moving on to our other question, you know, the elephant in the room is COVID. And I wanted to touch a bit on how has COVID really impacted your hiring demands and forecasting projections, both in the short and the long term. And has COVID impacted, you know, what you anticipate hiring in terms of numbers and forecasting over the next few years? Tony.
It was like a blip on our radar, to be honest with you. We run the company very lean, very agile. So we just pivoted a lot of things. Yeah, we did furlough some of our employees, but we strategically looked at that. We strategically looked at who we're furloughing and is it people who are making like immediate impact or not, and did they have the ability to be furloughed? And then we did let go of some of our contractors, but a lot of those were rehired pretty much 2 months later. And in fact, I think we actually turned a profit during the pandemic. So and it wasn't necessarily was it going to affect us or not? It, you know, with a guy like Elon running the helm, it really is about, all right, it is going to affect us no matter what. How do we pivot to continue to make it work for us? So again, that comes down to a mindset of all our employees. So it was just a blip, and we grew significantly. I think last quarter alone, I think we were close to 20,000 employees we hired worldwide. So nothing really seemed to skip a beat for us. I think it's just kind of the way we run our company. We're prepared. We're always working in chaos, and so we're always prepared for it.
Great, thank you. Susan, how about SMUD?
So we had no layoffs during the pandemic, what we realized we need to do is focus on our current workforce to help them understand and prepare for jobs of the future. We also turned our attention outward to our community, and we're partnering with community-based organizations to deliver job readiness and technical training to residents that are in under-resourced communities. And that'll help to position them for careers in clean mobility. I mentioned, with the other hat I wear is working with the California Mobility Center. And we realize how important it is to have a skilled workforce in that area. So as Dr. Eyler mentioned, it's important that businesses offer opportunities to our underserved communities and low-paid workers. And that'll help them, at least in some part, participate in this new and exciting career sector. So that's one of the reasons why the California Mobility Center and SMUD were partnering with our CBO partners to provide training to prepare folks for those career opportunities. As a whole, the electric utility industry is seeing a shift that's where technology is playing an increasingly important role. And the workforce is changing to one that's younger and in some cases, not all, but a lot more digitally literate. So that can have an impact in terms of just the types of opportunities we have, as well as the new ideas that come to us. So we found by working with, I know we have a question we're going to talk about internships, but as we bring folks into our program, they're able to look at solutions and provide alternatives that we may not have been able to think about. So I think that's really cool. And we're continuing to move towards the installation of more smart technology. And that requires more data. I talked about kind of this inundation of data. So other technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, those will become increasingly important. And so we're developing capabilities and the capacity to anticipate and meet the needs of energy customers to help them manage their own energy usage and understand their own energy usage. So that works requires us to be more, as we move to include more technology, that requires us to be more vigilant to protect against cyber threats and attacks. So, kind of a long answer, but, COVID, because the workforce is working more remotely, or a larger majority of the workforce is working remotely, cybersecurity has become even more important to our business.
Great insight. Thank you, Susan. Ralph.
Well, we're a much smaller business than my colleagues here on this call, but I would say that the impact of COVID for us in our particular business, the technology development continues. Our field operations have been curtailed quite a bit, not for what you would expect. It's our backlog is going up because the response from the municipalities and the jurisdictions that we work with, all of those individuals went home and stopped working. So the normal permitting processes that we've been accustomed to using have been virtually shut down. Permit times for us have gone from 2 weeks to 6 weeks and 3 weeks to for commercial applications all the way up to we're running one job that's almost 9 months to get the permit set done. The days are gone when you could go in and sit down with a planner at the city or the county where you were working, sit down, review the plans, they'd make corrections to it, you'd go resubmit the corrected plans, have the permit issued, and you were in business. Now it's multiple reviews. Every time a correction is submitted, it's 2 weeks. By the time we get the engineering done, resubmitted, they go through all of the reviews all over again, and it's just, that's really impacted our business. So it's not the market that's impacted the business, but it's been the jurisdictions where we're working that have been severely impacted. I want to say that we've been able to keep essentially 95% of all of our employees through this, thanks to some assistance from the government, the Payroll Protection Act. We've not had any indication that we've had to let anybody go, except for those people who have reacted negatively to the COVID, can't handle the stress and the pressure anymore, and who resigned voluntarily. We've done everything that we can to keep those employees fully employed, fully busy during this pandemic. But what we see going forward, if this is the new way of doing business, that the jurisdictions have to get more responsive, have to get more responsible for turning their workloads around faster and more efficiently. So it's been kind of an interesting struggle that we've had, not being able to stay in business because the demand for our product and for our services is quite high. But it's been the jurisdictions that are slowing down the cash cycle, the contract to completion, the cash collection. So we've managed to stay in business. We've fought through it just like our friends at Tesla have, only we have to be much more nimbler and more aggressive than Tesla because we are a smaller entity. And, we invent every day we come to work, we invent a new solution to a new problem that we run into. And I would agree with one of the comments on the texts that I've seen going back and forth. You have to love getting your hands dirty and your feet wet and being on the ground and innovating every single day to change the course of business and respond to all of those market pressures that are coming up, what we call internally Solar 2.0. And you have to be quick on your feet, and it's fun, and and it's tough to do. And I love every minute of it. And I don't think I'd go back to one of my former regular Silicon Valley jobs in a heartbeat. I love it. My grandparents, my grandfathers were both in the trades. I'm the first engineer in the family, chemical engineer by profession, electrical engineer by profession. And I have a blast. I enjoy and love what I do. And I hope that everybody that we have on this call feels the same way, because it's a new and exciting field each and every day.
Thank you for that, Ralph. Jeff.
So I guess there's two questions, right? The COVID impact, and then what is the big challenge for recruitment in the workforce? So COVID has been a bad situation. Out of that situation, it has created a larger imbalance in the supply and demand in home building. We can't keep up with demand. We can't produce the supply. We weren't producing the supply prior to COVID, and all COVID did is create a greater disparity between the two. As far as hiring for our industry, I mean, it was a stress condition prior to COVID. It is now a critical condition. We can't keep up, right? People are changing, right? They can work from home, so they're staying home, and that means that they're changing home. And the minute they go change home, that means they're buying a new home, and then we're trying to build them a new home. And we just don't have the people in our industry to keep up with that. Obviously, it affects all of our suppliers. We have shutdowns of industries, whether it's door suppliers, drywall companies, cabinet making companies, all these people that provide us products shut down. You guys have all touched on, what is occurring in Texas right now. Well, there's many things that are built in Texas that are shipped out of Texas. Right now, that state is closed. Therefore, all of Lennar has lost 5 days of work because materials aren't showing up, things aren't coming out of those factories. So, right, all of those things become stresses to it. I guess our biggest challenge in recruitment is really the misperception of our industry, right? We have a huge image problem. All of our, we're not really perceived as the most professional, honest, and trustworthy people. Because everybody comes and works on your home, and everybody that has an experience with, if you're a plumber or you're something, I don't know why my screen is beeping. Is that just mine?
It's somebody's phone ringing.
Okay. I don't know whose phone's ringing.
If it's from...
There we go.
Missed call.
Maybe they'll hang.
They're still trying.
Yep, there they go. Okay. So it's a perception, right? Everybody that comes and works on your home becomes a perception of our industry, even though they're not necessarily, say, a reflection of Lennar homes. But again, if somebody comes to do maintenance on your home and, right, you overpay for that, or they don't show up, or people, remodel their home, right? That's our industry. And so we get a lot of knocks from all of that. And then to the, the younger people, right? I mean, construction, their perception of it is that, look, it's dirty and it's hard. As Ralph said, you're going to get your hands dirty, you're going to get your feet wet. And they believe it's a hard way to make a living. And I mean, and it's not. Look, yes, it is hard work. A lot of the things that all of us do are hard. This is just a different type of hard. And it's rewarding, right? We solve problems, we put things together, we create neighborhoods, we create places where people grow up and raise families, right? And that is very, very noble. And so there's a great reward that comes from creating those neighborhoods when you show up and there's bare ground, and then there's homes, and then there's kids riding their bikes in the street. So we do have an issue, as far as long-term, as far as solving that perception of our industry and what we do, and really the size and scope of our industry. So those are the biggest challenges that we have.
Thank you for that. It's a great insight. I think we have time, Renee. I'll go to the last question, and then I think we'll wrap up due to time. The last question, and you touched on it, Susan, was really about, we touched on it in terms of recruitment and retention of our workforce. And we've seen an uptick statewide in terms of fundamental programs and real short-term contract education opportunities to not only provide the skill sets for you, the niche opportunity within ECU for a particular company or particular need, but really for I guess more of a cultural immersion to know what the jobs are, and is it, and I see in the chat as well, right? You don't know what you love until you try it. And those short-term pre-apprentice, short-term certificates and contract ed opportunities are ways to do that. And then you know you've got the right fit. And then when you bring them into the industry, they're more often higher retention, successful in their career path. And so to that point, maybe our last question will be around, what entry-level positions do you have available? What internships, work-based learning opportunities can you provide or inform the participants today that we can perhaps partner with you on in the future?
I guess that's back on me. So right now, obviously, I think our biggest role or entry-level role right now is installers. And I don't necessarily want to say that I want to, have someone go through, great programs like this and then go into just an installer role. So I think that the next, students who are coming out of these ECU programs, right, are not going into them to become an installer, right? They're going into them to do a little bit more and something that's a little bit more encompassing. But that's not to say that it's not an aspect of the jobs that, we're definitely looking for crew leads and whatnot. Further, we are really taking a very similar approach to what we're doing with our Start Service program. We're building one right now for manufacturing. And then we're also in the process of building one for energy, with the focus being crew leads, right? So taking someone who has a great product knowledge, but also has the ability to be some sort of leadership on the ground. I really do think like this question, it's for some reason sometimes it escapes me, is because I believe in the approach that like employers need to be the shepherds in their communities, right? And we shouldn't be relying 100% on community colleges. We need to help with, as Jeff was saying, help change mindsets. We need to be part of that marketing piece. We need to be making these skilled trades honorable again. We need to showcase, hey, this is great livable work. And further, really just throw the shine on what someone's kid or family member is going to be doing, right? Because they're well-paying jobs. And there's plenty of them. In fact, we're constantly looking for skilled trades, right? That's where the shortage is. It's not the jobs, it's the candidates. So, for us, we really take the approach where we're gonna put some skin in the game, because we know that the difficulties the schools have on trying to stay on pace, right? Just due to curriculum change and bureaucracy and things of that nature. So that's, internships, or we're always looking at internships. We're always looking at apprenticeship programs. We're always looking at how do we kind of control the environment? I know that, a little bit of a control freak aspect, but we do. And how do we bridge that gap? Because I feel like it's our responsibility to actually bridge the gap, and not the community colleges and schools to bridge that gap. And so that's kind of like my approach to this is, we'll take, we'll work with you to try and train the people, but it's kind of like under our guidance, so to speak. So, and it's been successful for us. It's become, we, on the service side, we don't have an entry-level technician who hasn't come through our START program now. The same thing is going to be for manufacturing. Any one of our equipment maintenance technicians moving forward will all be coming through our START manufacturing programs. Similarly, we're hoping that we build a really big pipeline of crew leads through our START energy program, and how, what that looks like and how that evolves has a ton of opportunities. I also think utilizing community colleges and other organizations for boot camps. And I think it's imperative that you're on advisory committees like this, right? Because this is where you really get to have your voice heard, but it makes so much more impact by just being here. So those are some things that I just want to, where we have these opportunities. And then the last one is we're really trying to focus on some externships, right? I think that's like where a lot of industry misses the mark, is, hey, you want a great way to scale out your information or what you want people to be learning, train the trainer. These are the people who work with these students on a daily basis. So we're really working on how do we build really solid externships that help our instructors at the community college level, because we hire a ton of skilled trades, and there's always something missing or someone, some sort of information. So we're really, this year I think the big focus has been on the externship, and so hopefully we'll be rolling that out, and I'd like to obviously be offering that to as many instructors as possible, and instructors, by the way, not administration, instructors. So James, I don't want to see you signing up for this, man.
You
really
put me out yourself.
Yeah. So I just, if it's kind of like the best way to, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Right. So that's like kind of like the motif, the mantra we're trying to take with education and educational programs.
Thanks for that detail. Maybe what I'll tee up as well, two things. We tend to throw around the word collaboration and partnership, but it's not a cliche. And what you're referring to is really what forums like this and those partnerships are meant to do, right? And there's nothing more tangible than showing students and prospective students interested than having these concrete partnerships that show A plus B equals C, right? This training and this certificate equals this job at this company at this wage, and that our ability to do a better job at that will accelerate broadening the pipeline. So thanks for those details. Maybe what I'll tee up, and I don't know if it's something you want to put in the chat box, or Renee, we want to take information and send it out, is the questions around how do we get more information about something, especially in this realm. So Tony, about the externships and the like. Renee, how would you prefer? Do we want to take information from the panelists and send it out to everybody afterward? Because I don't know that we have time.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, once we have that rolled out, like I'm not gonna offer something that I don't have that we can execute. Right. But once we roll out, we would definitely be like, James, I have good communication with you. Be like, James, we've got externships.
Okay.
And you'd be like, perfect, let's roll it up. Great. So I think that's how I'm going to approach it. Is once I have something physically in my hand, then I'll definitely send something out.
Yeah, and it might be good to work through Orion Walker, who's on this call. He's the point person for employer engagement for the North Far North. So I would say any questions from anyone on the call can be directed to him, or if you don't have his email, to Jesse or myself, and we'll connect you.
Very familiar with Orion.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Susan.
I think, James, you probably have heard me say this a number of times. I think what the utility industry really needs is a micro segment, because it's all about awareness. As my colleagues on the panel have said, you don't know what you like or you don't like if you're not exposed to it. So, and with that in mind, SMUD recognizes the need to provide internships. So we have high school internships as well as college internships, and they are paid internships. We also have scholarships. So and it's not just in any particular career area. We try to expose students as safely as possible to as much of SMUD as we can. And we work with our education partners on work-based learning opportunities. And because we have limited resources in terms of the number of internships we can provide, I'm a huge proponent of work-based learning opportunities, really providing projects to students and have them work on them in teams. It teaches a whole bunch of skills that we're looking for, and I think that's really important. And our projects range from things like data analytics to HR process improvements. We're actually currently working with a high school on a program we're calling Vehicles versus Assets. So how to keep young people from running into power poles. And having them come up with the solution. And we have a career ambassador program. We have folks who go out our employees go out to schools and the community to talk about careers at SMUD. So happy to talk to anybody about that, as well as if they want to stand up a similar program at their company, or talk to any of our folks about our internship or scholarship programs. So our folks also provide resume and internship workshops, and even talk to people about how to apply for a job at SMUD. So happy to share that information with anyone.
Are most of those programs and opportunities on the SMUD website?
I think the Career Ambassador program is there now. The scholarship program, the internship programs are there periodically because they are time-based. I think the scholarship program is available now. I think the deadline to apply is coming up quickly. The high school internship program will be up on the website when that's it.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to Ralph.
Real quick, I think one of the important things that we try and do at Saliva is to, in terms of encouraging people to work for us, is to offer a career path that's going to get them, I think, a rewarding life in the future. One of the most important things is the mentoring that we do with new employees as they come in. There's quite a bit of localized job training and specialty training that has to go on. And in general, giving a new hire a career path, entry-level employee career path that basically takes them from beginning installer all the way up through a crew lead to project manager to supply chain to construction manager, overall construction manager for all the multiple projects that we're working on, to designer, to electrical plan set design, mechanical plan set design. We offer a career path that I think most companies would recognize as something that's very important to employee retention. When you hire a new employee, you've got a responsibility to that employee to make sure that they're doing their job, that it's enjoyable for them to do, that it's not a grind. And I don't want us to be in a position of burning people out from a physical standpoint. We like to rotate them in and out of the field, so to speak. It keeps them fresh, it gives them new ideas, and it encourages them to develop more operational efficiency. How do we do things, more things better, faster, and cheaper? And it gives them, I think, a career path that's not only physically and mentally challenging and rewarding, but one that's going to enable them to continue into expanded roles, perhaps if they decide to change career paths for some reason. I think a lot of that has begun in I want to say the community colleges. I've worked with Gethsemane River College, their construction crews, construction training curriculum. I think it's very important that people understand the basics of construction before they ever come out and get on a rooftop. That really helps them adapt to the market conditions that we're working in, speaking the language, having the safe work practices. It gives them a jumping off point that allows them to progress back faster into our business, which gives us the opportunity to grow new business as well. So there's kind of a synergistic benefit to doing that, giving people the opportunity to have a career path, like I said, that's rewarding for them is extremely beneficial. It generates self-motivating factors in their attitudes and the way they approach the business. We're also looking at training people in finances, the financial aspects of running a business, where they learn to make educated decisions. Gee, if I do this, it's going to cost us X number of hours, which is going to translate into less profit margin in the future. So having that skill set educated coming out of the community college is very important to us. Working collaboratively, we did some work for the Tiny Home Project, built solar on top of the Tiny Home Project. So it was an opportunity to expose the students to solar and the technologies that we were working on, battery technology, everything all in one. And that's something that I think that a lot of the community colleges need to focus on, is getting the practical side project type of skill sets developed in their students. And having a long-term collaborative project that they're working on over the course of a couple of semesters would be really, really beneficial to us out in the marketplace where we're working, have them familiar with what's going on. Very important.
Great, thank you, Ralph. And last but not least, Jeff, bring us home.
Okay, I'll see if I can do it in a minute. So entry-level positions at Lennar at a division level, right? There's going to be construction manager in customer care. those dominated a division. So the local divisions, about 160 associates. 120 of them are either construction, customer care, or our sales force. Other positions that we would have in marketing, sales, construction, customer care coordinating, right, to support that group, as well as accounting, estimating, and purchasing. There's just, in a division, there's just less of those ancillary roles to support the home building operation. So most of it is in the construction supervisors out on the job. When it comes to internships, I mean, frankly, we do a very poor job of self-promotion through internships. Our hiring is really a short-term need, and we get really focused on that. I mean, overly focused on that. We kind of have a really hawkish kind of look at overhead, as you all see in the news, right? Affordability of homes, and we know that we got to keep costs down, and that trickles into our overhead. And so therefore, that really hinders our development and our training, because we don't employ those types of people. When you look at management inside of a division, it's very flat. So a director of construction is going to have maybe a couple area managers to help their construction managers, and then the construction managers, there's probably 90. I think the local division has 95 of those associates out in the field that are managed really by 6 people. So it's pretty flat. We have started a construction training program. We started this, and we have 5 regions across the United States. We started it in our Midwest region last year. And so we teach them, it's a 5.5-month program. We take them through all construction from the beginning of the home to the end. Then that's coordinated with the divisions to kind of walk them through how it is that the home does get built, so that we can build our own people. Has been talked earlier. We've repeated it, and now we've pulled it out of just the regional level. We've taken that nationally, and we're rolling it out here in January, and we have 71 associates in it across the company. And that represents at least a couple people out of 16 divisions. So we're still only about into half of our divisions across the United States. I imagine when we do this again, here at the end of the year, that number will be closer to 150. We've also partnered with the Harvard School of Business. They're publishing for on-demand leadership and development resources for, as Tony was saying, right, train the trainers. We have to, again, we are pretty much a mentorship driven is how it works. So we have to increase the ability of those mentors. They might be good home builders. They may not be great teachers. So we have to give them the ability to teach, because that's how we're going to train our organization.
Thank you so much.
I got pretty close.
Yeah, you got close. I'll give you the wiggle room. I'd like to thank all of the panelists. Considering time, I'm going to hand it back to Renee, but thank you to Tony, Susan, Jeff, and Ralph for your time on this Friday. I'm just a wealth of information and real practical market intelligence, what we like to call in the sector of real-time needs and opportunities. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it to Renee to close things out.
Yes, and I just want to concur, thank everyone for being a part of this discussion. I did drop some information in the chat about a Climate Justice and Job Summit that's coming up on March 30th that may be of interest to some or all of you. It's going to look at 3 sectors of the clean economy: the built environment, climate smart ag, and mobility. It has a very intentional justice focus in bringing in community members and community organizations that represent a more diverse pipeline, and how can we diversify the pipeline in addition to other things that we've talked about here. So if that's of interest to you, we encourage you to register. It's free, and join in on the conversation. Thank you to everyone who participated here. Orion Walker is your contact for employer engagement for the Far North region and community colleges. Orion, is there anything you want to say in conclusion here?
Sorry, I was just throwing up my contact info in the chat there again. I'm just gonna say, we've got 15 colleges in the Far North region, another 29 in the Bay Area, and I believe it's 115 statewide. And this has been a great conversation. I think that one of the main takeaways has been the ECU sector is moving full steam ahead. There's huge breadth of career opportunities and a huge need in terms of how to figure out how to train people up and get them into those positions. And my role is to be a point person in the North Far North region to help make those connections. So please reach out to me and I will connect programs with employers and employers with programs, and we can make it happen. So thank you again, everybody. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.